Yo! Welcome to the Fiction Blue. Got an absolute banger for you today. Harry discovered a secret magical alarm system under the cupboard floor that Sirius Black had set before Azkaban. Like, subscribe, comment below. Let's go. Chapter 1, The Loose Board. The summer had curdled. That was the only word Harry could find for it. Not ruined, not bad, but curdled, the way milk goes wrong slowly and then all at once, and by the time you notice the smell it's already too late to do anything about it. He'd been back at Privet Drive for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Vernon's satisfied silence, Petunia's pointed non-looks, and Dudley's wide berth that somehow managed to feel both like a gift and a punishment at the same time. 3 weeks of the kind of ordinary that pressed down on the chest like a stone, because ordinary was the worst possible thing when Cedric Diggory was dead and Voldemort was walking around in a body again, and nobody, outside of a small circle of people believed either of those things. Harry sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the wall. His homework was open on the desk. He hadn't touched it. Hedwig was at the window, watching him with the patient, slightly judging expression she reserved for occasions when she felt he was being particularly useless. The cage door was open, it always was, these days. She came and went as she pleased, but she hadn't left yet, which meant she was waiting for a letter. Harry had nothing to write. He'd started letters to Ron 4 times and to Hermione twice and to Sirius once, and every single one of them had died somewhere in the second paragraph, because there was nothing to say that didn't sound either like a complaint or a cry for help, and he didn't want to be either of those things right now. What he wanted, and this was the thought he kept circling back to, the one that made the least sense and the most sense simultaneously, was to do something. Not homework. Not wait. Not sit in this house that had never been his house and feel the summer curdling around him while Voldemort presumably did whatever Voldemort did when he was building an army and no one was stopping him. Something. He just didn't know what. Downstairs, he heard Vernon laugh at the television. The sound traveled up through the floor with a kind of determined cheerfulness, the way Vernon's laugh always did, big and certain and occupying more space than was strictly necessary. Then Petunia said something, and Vernon laughed again, and there was the clink of ice in a glass, and the evening settled in around Harry like a coat he hadn't chosen and couldn't take off. He picked up his quill, looked at the blank parchment, put the quill down. Hedwig clicked her beak. "I know," Harry said. She clicked it again. "I said I know." She ruffled her feathers with the air of someone who had said their piece and would not be repeating it, and turned to look out the window at the darkening street. Harry watched the sky go from pale gold to deep violet over the Dursleys' perfectly identical rooftops. In another week it would be his birthday. Nobody had mentioned it. He hadn't expected them to. The first rumble of thunder came just after 9. Harry heard it before he felt it, a low roll across the sky, distant still, the sound of something large moving slowly toward Privet Drive with the unhurried certainty of weather that has decided where it's going. The light in the room shifted, the faint gold of the street lamps suddenly doing more work as the last of the natural light faded out. Hedwig made a soft sound, not alarm exactly, more like acknowledgement, and then spread her wings and slipped out the window before the rain began. Harry watched her go. The thunder came again, closer this time. He got up and closed the window most of the way, not all the way, because the room got unbearable with it shut, and he'd learned over the years that a little rain on the sill was a price worth paying, and stood there for a moment with his hands on the frame and his forehead almost touching the glass. Out on Privet Drive, the first fat drops of rain began to darken the pavement. The street lamps made them look like falling pennies. He was still standing there when Vernon appeared in the doorway. Harry turned. Vernon was in his dressing gown, which always made him look both larger and somehow more pathetic than usual, and his face had the particular color it went when he decided to be angry about something and was working himself up to the actual delivery. He held a glass of whiskey. His free hand was curled at his side. "Phone," he said. Harry blinked. "What?" "The phone. Downstairs." Vernon's face got a shade darker. "Someone called for you." "Again." "I told them this is not a messaging service and I told them not to ring here, and they rang here anyway, so I'm telling you, tell your people to stop calling my house. Who was it? I didn't ask. I don't care. I told them you weren't available and I hung up. He looked at Harry with that particular expression, the one that managed to communicate both contempt and a slightly desperate need for Harry not to react in any way that would require further conversation. Keep them away from my phone. He left before Harry could respond. Harry stood for a moment, not moving, listening to Vernon's heavy tread go back down the stairs. The whiskey glass clinked once against the banister. Then the television volume went up, blotting everything else out. Sirius, he thought. Or Ron. Or Hermione. Whoever it was, they'd ring back. Or they wouldn't, and they'd write. He tried to explain to Ron, very patiently, that calling the Dursley house was the nuclear option, the thing you only did when every other form of communication had failed, because it always ended like this. Vernon incensed, Harry punished in some ambient and unspoken way for the social crime of having people who called him, and the message lost entirely. Ron had tried to understand. He'd not entirely succeeded. The thunder cracked directly overhead. Harry actually startled, a full body flinch that he was privately glad no one saw, and spun toward the window. The rain was coming properly now, sheeting against the glass, and the lightning that followed the thunder lit the room white for half a second, absolute and total, washing everything clean. In the white flash Harry caught a glimpse of the street below, every raindrop frozen, the pavement silver, the identical houses identical and silent. Then it was dark again. And downstairs, something went. Not loud. Not dramatic. A sound like a floorboard settling, which floorboards did all the time, but this one had a quality to it, a depth, almost, a resonance beneath the ordinary wood creak, that made Harry's head come up. He stood very still. The rain hammered the window. The television murmured on. Vernon laughed again, and the ice in his glass went clink. Nothing. Harry let his breath out. He was imagining things. He was stuck in this house with nothing to do and no one to talk to and a brain that had spent the last month chewing on itself, so naturally he was jumping at settling floorboards during thunderstorms like a first year. He sat back on the bed. The sound came again. This time it was different. Still beneath the ordinary register of household noise, still something a person not listening for it would file away and forget, but there was something in it that tugged at the part of Harry's brain that had been raised on magic and danger and the particular grammar of things that were not what they appeared to be. It came from below. Not the ground floor. Below that. The cupboard. Harry was on his feet before he decided to stand. He stood in the middle of his room with rain lashing the window and his wand already in his hand. He didn't remember picking it up, but there it was, warm in his grip, and he listened. The house breathed around him. Vernon's laugh track. The rain. The distant argument of thunder moving east. And then, faint as a heartbeat, from somewhere beneath the floor of the cupboard under the stairs, tick. Just the once. Small. Precise. The sound of something mechanical doing the thing it was designed to do. Harry went downstairs. He moved quietly without thinking about it. Years of navigating Dursley territory had built that habit deep, and reached the bottom of the stairs in the dark, not bothering with a light because Vernon and Petunia were in the sitting room and the hall light would show under the door. He padded past the kitchen on his left, past the coats hanging by the front door, and stopped in front of the cupboard. The door was closed. He hadn't been inside since his first day back from Hogwarts this summer, when he'd checked out of habit, the way you checked the cupboard in any house you grew up in. It still smelled the same, old dust and something faintly mildewed and the ghost of the small person he'd been when this space was his entire world. There was still a fold-down cot in there, because Petunia had never got around to replacing it with anything, and a shelf with some of Dudley's broken toys from 1993 that had also never been dealt with, and the underside of the staircase above making the space narrower as it went back. Harry opened the door and stood in the entrance and listened. The tick didn't come again. He hesitated for 5 seconds, then cast a silent lumos, Dumbledore's crowd had put protective enchantments on the house this summer, and he'd been told in no uncertain terms that underage magic was still forbidden, but the charm was small and the house was dark, and honestly, at this precise moment, he found he didn't particularly care. The wand tip lit up. The cupboard jumped into clear white light. Fold-down cot. Shelves. The cramped, low-ceilinged space where he'd slept for 10 years. The drawing he'd done on the wall when he was 5 of a rocket ship that had survived every Dursley cleaning regime, whether through oversight or some unconscious preservation on Petunia's part. Spider in the corner. Dust. He stepped inside, bent low to avoid the staircase, and looked at the floor. The floorboards here were old. The whole house was from the same 60s build that all the houses on Privet Drive came from, and they were the kind of boards that had been walked on so many times they'd gone slightly gray and smooth, the grain of the wood almost polished. Harry had memorized this floor as a small child. He'd had long empty hours and nothing else to look at. He knew which boards creaked. He knew which ones didn't. And the one at the far back corner, the one that had always been just slightly raised, always caught his toe in the dark because it stuck up a fraction of a centimeter more than the others, was different. The gap around it wasn't the gray-silver of old dust. It was dark. A specific, deliberate dark, like a shadow that was in the wrong place for the angle of the light. Harry crouched down and pressed the board with his fingers. It moved. Not the give of a warped floorboard. Not the sag of old wood under pressure. It moved with a mechanical smoothness, the resistance of something spring-loaded, something designed. He pressed it down and it depressed evenly, perfectly, and then he released it and it came back up with the same controlled precision, and when it was up again he got his fingernails under the edge and lifted. The board came away. Under it was a space, not large, maybe 30 centimeters square, lined with what looked like lead sheeting, edges fitted with the exact right degree of care to suggest someone who was very good at this but not entirely patient about it. Someone who worked fast and competently and cut corners that didn't matter because they knew the important parts. Inside the space were 3 things. The first was a device. Brass, roughly the size of a large pocket watch but circular rather than flat, more like a compass housing, or a scaled-down orrery, a sphere rather than a disc. Several small rings of metal orbited a central mechanism, and there were markings on the surface that Harry recognized as neither rune nor standard arithmancy, something older and more improvised, like a language someone had built themselves from borrowed parts. It sat in the lead lining with a faint warmth to it, the kind of warmth that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the particular quality of old, strong magic. Even through the air between them, he could feel it. A low, steady hum that wasn't quite sound. The second thing was a letter. Rolled rather than folded, sealed with plain black wax, no crest, no monogram, just a flat seal pressed in with a thumb. The parchment was old but not fragile. Someone had used a preservation charm on it, a good one, because the edges were as clean as the day it was rolled. The third thing was a journal. Small, battered, leather-bound, the kind of notebook someone had clearly carried around for a long time before deciding it needed to be hidden. The leather was dark with use and there were ink stains on the back cover and the initials JP. Pressed into the lower right corner in letters that were slightly wonky and entirely confident, the way someone signed something when they expected it to be found. Harry sat on the floor of the cupboard with the thunder rolling overhead and his wand lit in one hand and looked at these 3 objects for a long time. His hands were completely steady. He picked up the device first, because it was the one making the noise, the tick, and because something in him knew, the way you sometimes knew things before you understood them, that the device was the thing that mattered most immediately. It was warm in his palm, heavier than it looked, and when he held it the rings shifted slightly, not dramatically, not with any great fanfare, just a small, almost imperceptible adjustment, like a compass needle swinging to north. One of the outer rings rotated half a degree and stopped. The tick came again, right against his palm. "All right," Harry said quietly, to himself or to the device or possibly to the person who'd put it here. "All right. I've found you." The device was still. He picked up the letter next. Turned it over. Nothing on the outside except the plain wax seal and a faint smell that he couldn't immediately identify, something botanical, something sharp, something like the warmth of a fireplace in a house he'd never been to. He pressed the seal and it gave cleanly, the wax not crumbling but releasing in one piece, and he unrolled the parchment. The handwriting inside stopped him cold. He'd seen this handwriting before. Once, in a letter his mother had written to a friend, found in Bathilda Bagshot's house a lifetime ago. He'd held that letter and felt the specific anguish of a person reduced to paper. But this handwriting wasn't his mother's. He'd seen it in photographs and ministry records and once, briefly, on a scrap of parchment in Dumbledore's office that Dumbledore had moved away before Harry could read it properly. This was Sirius's handwriting. Not the careful, deliberately legible hand of someone writing for posterity. This was real handwriting, fast and slightly tilted to the right, the kind of script that was trying to keep pace with a mind going faster than the pen. There were crossed-out words. There were small additions in the margins. Whoever wrote this had not sat down to compose a careful farewell. They'd written in a hurry, and the hurry was in every stroke. Harry, if you're reading this then either I'm dead or something's gone wrong enough that I couldn't get to you myself, and in either case I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I should have been there. The thing you're holding is called a Marauder's beacon. Technically your father built most of it and I built the parts he got bored of, which is how everything we ever made worked. James had the ideas and I had the patience for the fiddly bits, and between us we usually produced something that didn't explode. Usually. The beacon was meant to do one simple thing, find you if I couldn't. It's keyed to your blood, not a great deal of it. Your father managed the charm with just enough, and it's been waiting. I buried it here because Dumbledore wanted you here and I didn't agree but I lost that argument, and this was the best I could do. This was the best I could do for you. There are things in it that I can't write here because the letter isn't the place for them, things you'll need to find in stages, when the beacon decides you're ready, which sounds like something I made up to sound mysterious but is actually a design feature your father was very proud of. He was annoying like that. You'll understand when you meet it properly. The journal is his. I added some notes. Don't skip ahead. The beacon is awake because it heard you. It's been waiting 15 years for that, and I imagine it's very pleased with itself. Find the cache. The beacon knows where it is. Everything after that is yours. I love you. I have loved you since the night your mother brought you home from St. Mungo's and you grabbed my finger and wouldn't let go. You were furious about something even then. I told James you were going to be trouble. He said good. Serious P.S. The device won't respond to anyone else. If someone tries to take it from you, don't let them. It'll help. Harry read the letter 3 times. The first time he read it quickly, the way you read something when you're not sure you've understood it correctly. The second time he read it slowly, parsing each sentence, letting the handwriting be real and not just letters on a page. The third time he didn't really read it at all, he just held the page and looked at the familiar-unfamiliar slant of the letters and let himself feel, just for a moment, what it meant that Sirius Black had crouched in this cupboard at some point in October 1981 and made something and hidden it and hoped. He'd hoped Harry would never need it. He'd made it anyway. Harry rolled the letter very carefully and tucked it into the pocket of his jeans, then picked up the journal. The JP on the cover felt deliberate in a way that no amount of wornness could erode. He opened it to the first page. His father's handwriting was different from Sirius's, more vertical, less rushed, with the occasional flourish on certain letters that suggested someone who'd had good handwriting drilled into him young and had found creative ways to be individual within it. The first page had a date, September 14, 1979. 2 years before Voldemort. Before everything. He closed it. Not because he didn't want to read it, but because something in him knew that reading his father's journal at 1 a.m. on the floor of a cupboard, during a thunderstorm, alone, was not the right way to do it. That deserved, it demanded, more than this. He sat for another moment with the rain on the roof and the house quiet around him and the device warm in his closed palm. Then he stood up, replaced the floorboard, which went back down with the same smooth precision it had come up, and carried all three objects upstairs to his room. He set them on the desk and sat on the bed and looked at them. The device, the beacon, Sirius had called it, was doing something new. The outer rings had shifted while he'd been coming up the stairs, and now two of them were aligned at slightly different angles than before, and the surface marking that had been at the top was now rotated 45 degrees clockwise. It looked, Harry realized, less like a compass and more like a combination lock mid-tumble. Something inside it was working. Not urgently. Not alarmingly. Just working, the way a well-made thing worked when it had finally found the reason it was built. He reached out and touched it with one finger. Warm. And something moved inside it, not the rings, not anything visible, but a shift in the quality of the warmth, like a fire responding to a hand held near it. Like recognition. Right, Harry said, to the room, to the night, to the ghost of a man who'd crouched under these stairs before Harry was old enough to know what a godfather was. Right. Let's see what you've got. He picked up his quill. He wrote to Hermione first, because Hermione would know things he didn't and would ask the right questions and, honestly, because if anyone was going to understand the significance of what he'd found, it was her. He wrote to Ron second, because Ron was Ron and because keeping Ron out of something like this was both wrong and practically impossible. He kept both letters short. I found something important, you need to see it, don't tell anyone at the Order, I'll explain when you get here, and sealed them and set them on the windowsill for Hedwig when she came back. He didn't write to Sirius. He sat with that for a moment. The habit was so deep, found something, tell Sirius, that it had moved through him before he'd caught it, a reflex, a reach toward a door that wasn't there. He set it aside. Not dealt with, not resolved, just set aside, because that particular grief was a long conversation and this wasn't the time for it. He looked at the beacon. It looked back, in whatever way a brass device with orbital rings could look at anything. He thought about Sirius at, what, 21? 22. Young enough to still be mostly reckless, old enough to understand that the war they were in was the kind that didn't leave all its players standing. Young enough to build something on hope. Old enough to know the hope might not be enough. He'd hidden it here. Here, in this specific house, in this specific cupboard, under this specific floorboard. He'd known Harry would end up here. He'd disagreed with it. He'd built something anyway, because in Sirius Black's version of love, disagreement and action coexisted without difficulty. You could think something was wrong and still do the best possible thing within its constraints. Harry sat with that for a while. The thunder had moved east, the storm pulling away toward London, the rain gentling now from a hammering to a steady wash against the glass. The room was very quiet. On the desk, the beacon's rings shifted by 2 degrees and stopped. He should sleep, he knew. He was tired in the deep, structural way he'd been tired for 3 weeks, the kind of tired that sleep didn't entirely fix because it wasn't about sleep. But he lay back on the bed with his eyes on the ceiling and his mind doing what it did, picking things up and turning them over, looking at the angles. Sirius had built this. James had helped. They'd hidden it here before the Fidelius charm, before everything fell apart. The night Pettigrew betrayed them, the night Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow, the night that created everything that came after, neither of them had known it was coming. The beacon had sat in this floor for 15 years, waiting. It had ticked tonight. Not 3 weeks ago when Harry arrived back. Not last summer. Tonight, during a thunderstorm, after Harry had spent the evening in a particular flavor of desperate purposelessness, wanting to do something, and the floor had moved, and the beacon had ticked, and here they were. He turned his head and looked at the device on the desk. It's been waiting 15 years for that, and I imagine it's very pleased with itself. Yeah, Harry said quietly, and he almost, smiled. You and me both. He reached over without sitting up and touched the journal cover. The leather was worn in the way that things worn by the right person felt, not damaged but experienced. He traced the initials with his thumb. J.P. The letters were slightly off-center, the J bigger than the P, which probably meant something about his father that Harry had no way to decode yet. He had a journal. He had a letter. He had a beacon. He had the beginning of something, that particular quality of beginning that doesn't announce itself but sits in the chest with a weight and a warmth simultaneously, the feeling of a gear catching, a mechanism engaging, something built to do a thing finally doing it. Outside, the last of the thunder rolled away over the rooftops of Little Whinging. In the house, Vernon's television was silent. Petunia's bedroom light had been off for an hour. The house breathed in its quiet, ordinary, perfectly terrible way, and Harry Potter lay on his bed and looked at the ceiling and felt, for the first time in 3 weeks, as though the summer might not entirely have curdled after all. It might, in fact, be about to become something else entirely. He reached over and picked up the beacon again, and held it against his chest, and stared at the ceiling, and thought about a man he would never get to thank crouching under these stairs in the last good autumn of the world his parents had known, working fast, working well, burying hope under a floorboard. The beacon ticked once, gently, against his ribs. Like a second heartbeat. Like a promise. He was asleep within the hour, the beacon in his closed hand and the journal and the letter on the pillow beside him, the window open to the cool post-storm air, Hedwig's perch empty and waiting. He slept better than he had in 3 weeks. Considerably better. And in the morning, before Vernon was even up, he was at his desk with the journal open and his wand lit and a bowl of cereal going cold beside his elbow, and he'd stopped even pretending to eat it 3 pages in. His father's handwriting scrolled across the pages in its precise, slightly flourished hand, and every sentence was new in the way that things are new when you've been waiting for them your whole life without knowing you were waiting. By the time he heard Vernon's alarm clock sound through the ceiling, he'd read 40 pages and set the journal down only when the beacon on the corner of his desk, the outer rings now at a new configuration, a new set of angles he was beginning to understand weren't random, made a sound he hadn't heard before. Not a tick this time. Something lower, something that felt less mechanical and more like the sound a person made when they drew breath before speaking. Harry looked at the beacon. The beacon's rings had settled into an alignment he somehow recognized even though he'd never seen it before, the way you sometimes recognize the structure of a piece of music on the first listen because you knew the composer. On its surface, in a script that appeared to be forming as he watched, letter by letter, not writing, just appearing, the way condensation formed on glass, were 3 words. Not a message, exactly. More like an instruction. Find the cache. Harry looked at those 3 words for a long moment. Then he looked at the window, where the morning was coming in clean and cool and new-washed, the street below empty in the early quiet, the puddles from last night's rain still dark on the pavement. He picked up the quill. He wrote a 3rd letter, shorter than the other 2, just 4 words and his name, and added it to the stack on the windowsill. He was done waiting. Chapter 2, The Marauders voiced the journal was not a diary. Harry figured this out somewhere around page 12, when the entries stopped being dated and started being something closer to a working document, notes and diagrams and half-finished theories in the margins, the kind of thing someone wrote when they were trying to solve a problem and paper was the thinking tool. His father hadn't been recording his life. He'd been working. The first 40 pages were what Harry had read before Vernon's alarm clock went off. After breakfast, which he'd made himself while the Dursleys ate in pointed silence, Petunia watching him with the expression she reserved for things she couldn't explain and refused to ask about, he'd gone straight back upstairs and kept reading. By mid-morning he had a picture. James Potter had started the journal in September 1979 as a record of what he and Sirius called the Marauders' Practical Defense Compendium, which was exactly as grandiose as it sounded and considerably more functional than it had any right to be. The 2 of them had been out of Hogwarts for a year. The war was happening around them with increasing and personal urgency, people they knew were dying, people they'd grown up with were turning, and the Order of the Phoenix was, in James's unsparing assessment, brilliant at meetings and inconsistent at everything else. The journal was his response to that. A private catalogue of everything useful they'd learned, built, borrowed, or invented that the Order wasn't doing and should be. The beacon was in there. Pages 23 through 31, with Sirius as annotations in the margins in a different ink, darker. Then he read them a fifth time with the beacon in his other hand and tried to understand what he was holding. It was more complex than the letter had suggested. The blood keying was the simple part, a single drop, a simple charm, permanent bonding to the intended recipient. The alarm function was the next layer, a ward-sensing mechanism that used the blood key as a targeting anchor and would activate if Harry came into mortal danger within its detection radius. Sirius had extended that radius to cover the entirety of Privet Drive, which meant the beacon had spent 15 years with its proverbial ear pressed to the floor of this house, listening for a specific magical frequency. The third layer was the one that made Harry sit very still for a while. His father had written, "The innermost mechanism isn't alarm, isn't ward, it's a record. Properly speaking, a resonance archive. The old Black family magic. Basically, a magical impression of a living voice, preserved in an inanimate object, sustainable indefinitely if the casing is stable and the original charm is well executed enough. We haven't done one before, so the execution is either perfect or catastrophically wrong and there's no middle ground. S is convinced it's perfect. I give it 60-40. Sealed until the beacon determines the recipient is ready." In the margin, Sirius had written, "It's perfect. Stop worrying. Also, you're worse than 60-40, you're at least 75. Then James had written underneath, 75 for or against. And Sirius had answered, yes. Harry sat with the journal across his knees and looked at the beacon on the desk. There was a recording inside it. A resonance archive, which presumably meant a preserved magical impression of Sirius's voice, Sirius in 1981, young and whole and not yet carrying 15 years of Azkaban, not yet the hollowed-out version Harry had found in a cave by the sea his third year. The Sirius from before. The Sirius who had crouched under these stairs and made something extraordinary and buried it under a floorboard because that was what you did when you loved someone and the world was falling apart. He couldn't open it yet. The beacon would decide when he was ready, which was the sort of thing that could be maddening if he let himself be maddened by it. He chose not to be. Instead he turned back to the journal and kept reading. By noon he'd reached page 80, and his cereal bowl from the morning was still on the desk and had developed a crust, and Hedwig was back on her perch making very pointed eye contact. "I sent letters," he told her. "I'm waiting." She looked at his cold cereal. "I'll eat properly later." She looked back at him with an expression that communicated, with considerable precision, that she had heard that exact sentence before and its predictive accuracy was poor. He ate the cereal. It was terrible. He didn't particularly notice. The responses from Ron and Hermione came the next morning, both at roughly the same time, Ron's owl Pig arriving in a state of exhausted hysterical energy that was just Pig's baseline, and a second owl Harry didn't recognize, sleek and professional, with Hermione's letter tied to its leg with the particular neatness of someone who'd been up since 6. He read Ron's first, because Ron's was shorter. "Harry, what did you find? How important is important? Mum's not going to let me out of sight for another week. She's been in a total state, but I'll figure something out. I told Fred and George the first needed a favor. Don't worry about that. What did you find? R.P.S. Don't tell me not to tell the order because I already haven't and I won't, but you owe me an explanation." He read Hermione's second. "Harry, you said don't tell the order, so I haven't, and before you ask, yes, I'm sure, and yes, I've thought about it, and no, I don't think it's the wrong call given that every single time we've trusted the order with information about something you're involved in it's been filtered through Dumbledore's judgment about what you should and shouldn't know, which is exactly the problem we already have. The device you're describing, I couldn't find a direct reference, but I went through magical mechanical history volumes I threw 4 last night and there's a passing mention of something called a resonance archive in a footnote about Black family magic. It's very old, Harry. Preministry old. The kind of magic that doesn't get taught because it's complicated and temperamental, and the families that practiced it guarded the knowledge carefully. More importantly, I'm coming. Don't argue. I've already written to my parents and I'll be on the night bus by Thursday morning. I've thought of 3 separate reasons why this is logical, and I'll tell you all of them if you try to stop me, but honestly the most important one is simply that you shouldn't be alone with something this significant. I'll bring my books. Hermione. P.S. The fact that it woke up during the thunderstorm isn't coincidence. Sirius used old weather-responsive activation charms sometimes. I found a reference in Magical History of the British Isles. He would have designed it to respond to a specific set of environmental conditions combined with your proximity and emotional state. In simple terms, it waited until you were ready to receive it. P.P.S. I think that's rather beautiful, actually. Don't tell Ron I said that. Harry looked at the ceiling. Thursday, he said. The beacon, which was currently engaged in whatever internal process it had been running since yesterday, the rings rotating by small degrees, the surface markings shifting every few hours into configurations that seemed increasingly purposeful, made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been an entirely unrelated mechanical process. He decided it was agreement. He spent Wednesday doing something he hadn't done since he'd been back at Privet Drive, he actively thought. Not the circular, self-consuming worrying he'd been doing for 3 weeks, but real, directed thinking, the kind that used paper and had steps. He spread the journal out, positioned the beacon beside it, and worked through the pages systematically, cross-referencing Sirius's annotations with the main text, building a picture of how the beacon was supposed to function. He filled 2.5 sheets of parchment with notes, wrote a dozen questions in the margins, crossed out 3 theories and confirmed 2 others. The JP journal was dense with information, but it wasn't impenetrable. His father had written clearly, with the underlying assumption that whoever read it was intelligent and would follow without hand-holding. Harry found he was following, more easily than he'd expected, and there was something both gratifying and quietly painful about that. Something in the structure of how his father thought that felt familiar, not from memory but from something further back than memory. Thursday came. The night bus arrived on Privet Drive at 9:17 in the morning, which was exactly the kind of arrival time guaranteed to maximize neighborhood disturbance and minimize Dursley peace of mind. Harry watched from his window as it materialized between 2 parked cars with the usual violent spatial displeasure, deposited Hermione on the pavement with her bag, and departed with a noise like a thunderclap in reverse. 3 doors opened on Privet Drive to see what the sound was. One of them was number 4. Vernon Dursley appeared on the front step in his work suit, already running late, and stared at Hermione standing on his pavement with a backpack and a look of calm determination. Hermione looked at him. "Good morning, Mr. Dursley," she said pleasantly. "I'm here for Harry." Vernon's face went through 4 colors. Then, and this, Harry thought, watching from the window, was the singular most satisfying thing that had happened to him all summer, Vernon said nothing. He looked at Hermione with the expression of a man who had decided, at some level below active decision-making, that this particular battle was not worth whatever it cost, turned around, and went back into the house. Hermione's calm expression cracked into a small, private smile as Vernon's back cleared the doorway. Harry was downstairs before she knocked. He opened the door and they stood there for a second, just looking at each other, and then Hermione stepped forward and hugged him with the brisk, no-nonsense efficiency of someone who had decided in advance that the hug was happening and had allocated it exactly the duration it needed. It was warm and real, and Harry let himself have it. "You look terrible," she said, stepping back and looking at him properly. "Thanks. You're not sleeping enough." "I've been sleeping better the last 2 days, actually." He stood aside to let her in. "Hermione, show me," she said. He showed her. He watched her face while she looked at the beacon, read the letter. He gave her the letter because it seemed right, she would need to understand what they were dealing with, and then picked up the journal and opened it with the careful hands of someone accustomed to handling significant texts. She didn't speak for almost 10 minutes. Just read, turning pages with one hand and periodically picking up the beacon with the other to examine it from a new angle, holding it up to the window light, tracing the surface markings with her thumb. When she set the journal down, her expression had changed. "Harry," she said. "I know. This is remarkable. This is genuinely extraordinary magic. The resonance archive alone," she stopped. "You understand what's in there?" Sirius's voice. "A recording. Not just a recording." She set the beacon down with a care that she extended to very few things. "A resonance archive isn't like a phonograph cylinder or even a pensive memory. It's more like a complete magical impression. Not just the voice. The intent, the emotional state, the magical signature of the caster. It's the closest thing to presence that magic can preserve." She paused. "He put himself in there, Harry. The whole of him, at a specific moment." Harry looked at the beacon. "When does it open?" "According to your father's notes, when the beacon decides you're ready. Which means it has some kind of assessment mechanism built in." She frowned thoughtfully. "It activated 2 days ago. The cache reference appeared yesterday. It might be." She picked up the journal again and flipped back 10 pages. "Here. Your father says the beacon operates in stages. Each stage unlocks when the previous one is completed and the user demonstrates. I think that word is engagement, though his handwriting gets looser here, demonstrates engagement with the material. So it's not just waiting for the right time. It's watching to see if you're taking it seriously." "That's very James Potter," Harry said, and surprised himself with it. Hermione smiled. "It really is. So what's the next stage?" "The cache. Your father's notes describe it as a secondary location, somewhere outside this house where Sirius stored resources, tools, additional information. The beacon should lead us there." She looked at the surface markings. "These configurations, I've been thinking about this since your letter. They're directional, aren't they? Not a code. A map. Or the beginning of one." Harry reached over and touched the beacon and it responded the way it always did, the slight shift, the warmth adjusting, and the outer ring rotated 12 degrees clockwise. He'd been watching this long enough now to know that the rotation wasn't random and it wasn't a malfunction. It was attention. "I think it responds to me," he said. "More than it would to someone else. Obviously. It's blood-keyed. No, I mean, when I touch it, the configuration changes. Like it's showing me something, specifically me. I tried it with my left hand and it was slower. I think it's reading something from my right hand." Hermione picked up the journal with the speed of someone who already suspected something. She turned to page 27 and read for 10 seconds. Her eyes went slightly wide. "Your father writes that the keying isn't just to blood, it's to wand hand. It uses the wand hand as a secondary identifying channel because Sirius's theory was that a person's magical signature is strongest through their primary casting hand." She looked up. "So it's not just waiting for you. It's reading you. Your magical output, your emotional state, your readiness. Through your hand. That's either brilliant or extremely invasive. It's both." She said it with the frank admiration of someone who recognized quality work. "But it means the beacon isn't going to open until you're ready, not until some arbitrary time passes. Which also means," she paused and worked through the logic, the expression on her face that meant conclusions assembling themselves in sequence. "It's been running an assessment since you found it. The stages it's progressed through, waking up, showing you the letter, the cache instruction, those are responses to what it's read from you. It found you ready to know about the letter. It found you ready to know about the cache. And the archive, it'll decide when I'm ready for that." "Yes." They both looked at the beacon. "There's a part of me," Harry said after a moment, "that thinks Sirius knew exactly how irritating that would be. I think your father definitely thought it was funny." 75, Harry said, and when Hermione looked at him blankly he showed her the journal margin exchange and she laughed, a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, the kind she didn't do often in difficult circumstances but which, when it came, made the room feel larger. Ron arrived Friday morning. He appeared at the door before Harry even heard the knock, wearing an expression of barely contained excitement that suggested the method of his escape from the burrow was either very creative or very concerning, possibly both. He had a bag over one shoulder and a smear of what appeared to be something orange across his left ear. "Don't ask about the ear," he said, stepping inside without waiting. "I wasn't going to." Fred helped. "It's fine. Mostly fine." He looked around the hallway with the uncomplicated ease of someone who'd been here before and had strong opinions about it. "Where's Hermione?" "Where's the thing?" "Upstairs," Harry said. "Ron, I know. Important. Serious. Magical device. Not telling the order." Ron was already taking the stairs 2 at a time. "I read your letter 4 times. I have questions." Harry followed him up. The reunion between Ron and Hermione involved approximately 15 seconds of warmth before degenerating into Hermione explaining the beacon's mechanisms in a level of detail that made Ron's eyes gradually develop the expression of a person trying to read a map in a language they half understood, nodding along with the studied calm of someone who had decided understanding wasn't strictly required when trust was available instead. "So basically," Ron said, when she paused for breath, "Sirius buried a magic clock thing here that's been waiting for Harry. There's a recording of Sirius inside it that'll open when it thinks Harry's ready, and there's some kind of stash somewhere in London that it'll lead us to." "That's," Hermione looked at her notes. "Structurally accurate, yes." "Right." He turned to Harry. "So when do we go?" "I'm working out the directional system," Hermione said. "The markings are clearly indicating a location, but I need to cross-reference, Hermione." "Yes." Ron picked up the beacon, held it out, and looked at it with the straightforward confidence of someone who has decided the best approach to a complicated thing is to just pick it up. "Harry. Hold it and face different directions and we'll see which way the rings move most." Hermione looked at him for a moment. Actually that might work." "Sometimes it's not complicated," Ron said. It wasn't complicated. Harry stood in the center of his small bedroom and turned slowly, beacon in his right hand, while Hermione watched the rings and Ron watched the surface markings, and when Harry was facing northeast the outer ring made 4 rapid rotations in succession and stopped at a definitive angle, and the innermost ring, which had barely moved since he'd found the beacon, shifted a full 15 degrees. "Northeast," Ron said. "London," Hermione said. "Northeast of here." "Central London, probably." "Probably Grimmauld Place." Harry said. "No. Too obvious, and besides, Sirius wouldn't have, he didn't own Grimmauld Place when this was made. It was his parents' house in 1981 and he and his mother were barely speaking." Hermione was already in the journal again. "He said a Black family safe house. Something from the old network, the pre-Voldemort network, the family properties that weren't on any public register. So something the Order doesn't know about." Hermione met his eyes. "I think that's rather the point." They spent the rest of Friday planning, which meant Hermione made a list and Harry packed a bag and Ron ate everything in Harry's room that counted as food and then wandered downstairs and somehow ended up in a staring contest with Dudley in the kitchen that resolved with Dudley retreating to the sitting room and Ron returning upstairs with a bag of crisps he'd found and an expression of mild satisfaction. "What happened?" Harry asked. "Nothing." He looked at me. I looked at him. Ron opened the crisps. "I had Scabbers in my bag for 3 years without knowing he was a murderer. Dudley Desley doesn't register." Harry thought this was probably the most efficient piece of context management he'd ever witnessed. That night, the beacon changed again. Harry woke up at 2 in the morning with the absolute certainty that something had shifted, and sat up in the dark and reached for the device on his nightstand and held it and felt it immediately, a new configuration, the rings at angles he hadn't seen before, and on the surface the directional markings had resolved into something sharper, more specific. Not just northeast but a clarity to the instruction that felt different from the general orientation of yesterday. He got his wand and lit it low and looked. The surface read, "Ready. Tomorrow." He stared at that for a while. Then he looked at the sealed place in the beacon's center, the innermost mechanism that housed the archive, and thought about Sirius's voice in there, waiting, and felt the particular weight of something he couldn't rush and had to let come. "Not yet," he said quietly, to himself mostly. "I know." The beacon was warm and still. He lay back down and looked at the ceiling and let himself think, really think, about what this all meant in the broader context of everything. Voldemort was back. The Ministry was in denial. Dumbledore was keeping Harry at a distance he hadn't chosen and didn't accept. The Order was meeting in a house Harry had been told about but not trusted with the details of. And somewhere between all of that, between the official version of events and the careful management of what Harry was and wasn't allowed to know, was this. A 15-year-old message from two men who'd known what it meant to be young and capable and at war, who'd believed Harry would be all free, and had built something to help him become them. He thought about the ready on the beacon's surface. "I've been ready," he thought. "I've been ready for a while. It's everyone else who's not sure." The thought didn't have bitterness in it, not exactly. It had clarity. The same kind of clarity the thunderstorm had cracked open in him 2 nights ago when the floor moved. Things settling into their right positions, the particular relief of a picture coming into focus. Saturday morning came in warm and clear. Hermione had notes. Ron had a plan for getting the night bus without anyone from the Order seeing them board, which involved a side street and a deliberate departure before 8 in the morning when the neighborhood watch contingent was still having their tea. Harry had the beacon and the journal and the letter and a calm, settled feeling in his chest that was completely new and entirely welcome. The Dursleys were still asleep. They left a note on the kitchen table. Harry had written it, brief and declarative, "I've gone to London. I'll be back. Don't call the Order." He didn't ask permission. He didn't explain. He left the note because leaving without a word at all felt like something he'd grown out of, and because it was slightly more considerate than nothing, but the days of asking the Dursleys for anything were thoroughly over. He locked his room, put Hedwig out with instructions to find him when she needed to, pocketed the beacon, and walked out the front door into the Saturday morning. Ron was already on the pavement, squinting in the sun. Hermione had the bus schedule open. 8:13, she said. Corner of Magnolia Road. Come on. They walked without rushing, through the quiet early streets, and nobody said anything particularly significant because sometimes the moment didn't need it, sometimes you were in the right company doing the right thing and the conversation could wait. The morning was genuinely beautiful, cool and bright, the kind of summer morning that could make even little whinging look like somewhere a person might choose to be. Harry touched the beacon through his jacket pocket. It was humming. Faintly, quietly, the way it had hummed against his ribs that first night, the second heartbeat feeling, the thing that was almost but not quite a sound. Ron glanced at him sideways. "You all right?" "Yeah," Harry said. He meant it. They turned onto Magnolia Road as the night bus materialized with its usual aggressive cheerfulness, purple, large, and deeply unconcerned with the laws of physics, and Stan Shunpike leaned out from the door with the same leather jacket and bad haircut energy he always brought and squinted at Harry with the particular expression of someone trying to remember if they knew a person. "Harry Potter," he said. "Stan. Where you off to, then?" Harry thought about it. He had an approximate address. Hermione had worked it out last night from the directional data and a cross-reference of old Black family property records she'd found in a history of wizarding families and some supplementary records she'd old for from the Ministry Library, and the address was in the city, the very old part of London that predated the numbered streets, where the buildings had been there long enough to accumulate the particular architectural amnesia of places that had been rebuilt and renamed so many times they'd effectively buried themselves. "Dunno the exact address," Harry said. "We'll know it when we get close." Stan shrugged. This was apparently not an unusual passenger statement, which said a lot about the regular night bus clientele. City of London, then. City of London. He paid for all three of them. He'd got money from his trunk before leaving, and they found a table near the back and sat down, and the night bus lurched into motion with its characteristic deranged velocity, and Hermione held her books to her chest and Ron grabbed the edge of the table and Harry took the beacon out of his pocket and set it on the table and watched it. The rings were moving. Not the small adjustments of the past 3 days, real movement now, purposeful and directed, the outer rings rotating steadily in the direction of travel, the middle ring oscillating slightly as the bus changed direction, the innermost ring absolutely still in the way that the center of something spinning is always perfectly still. It was navigating. Using the night bus's ridiculous speed and its own directional mechanism to pull them toward wherever they were going. It's active, Hermione said, watching it with hungry eyes. The outer ring is doing something systematic. Every time we turn it recalibrates. She had her notebook out. Harry, can I? She reached toward the beacon. It stopped dead the moment her hand came within 5 centimeters of it. All 3 rings frozen. Surface markings gone still. The hum vanishing so completely it was startling, like a sound you'd stop noticing until it disappeared. They all looked at it. Hermione withdrew her hand. The beacon resumed, smoothly, as if nothing had happened. Right, Ron said. Sirius wasn't joking, Harry said. The letter said it wouldn't respond to anyone else. It didn't break, Hermione said, with the slightly wounded dignity of someone accustomed to being responded to by books and magical objects generally. It just paused. It paused very pointedly, Ron said. Yes, thank you, Ron. Harry looked at the beacon and felt a surge of something that was probably inappropriate, a deep, warm satisfaction, the particular pleasure of a thing that was specifically and entirely his. He'd spent 5 years at Hogwarts sharing everything by necessity, the dormitory, the common room, the danger, and there was nothing wrong with that, nothing at all. Ron and Hermione were the best people he knew and he'd die for them without a second thought. But this was Sirius's for him. For him specifically. And that was something he hadn't had much of and hadn't known he missed. The night bus made 11 stops between Little Whinging and the city, which should have taken 40 minutes and took 9. They slid off the bus on a street Harry half recognized from the one time Arthur Weasley had given him a very brief and excited tour of what he called the old magical quarter of the city, not Diagon Alley, which was a relatively recent construction in the grand scheme of things, but the older network of streets and buildings that had existed before the international statute of secrecy made visible magical commerce impractical. The beacon immediately became more active. The rings were moving quickly now, the outer one doing a full rotation every 10 seconds, and the surface markings had shifted into a pattern Harry had seen only once before, the configuration from the night the beacon first woke, which he now understood as its fully activated state. It was pointing. Left up the street, then a right turn, then along a narrowing alley where the buildings leaned toward each other overhead and the cobblestones were original, Victorian or older, and the sound of the main street died quickly. Here, Harry said, not entirely sure why he said it, but the beacon was suddenly absolutely motionless, all rings locked, the hum rising to a pitch he could feel in his back teeth. They stood in front of a building. It looked unremarkable, at first. A narrow Georgian townhouse, sandwiched between a solicitor's office and what appeared to be a closed import business, its windows dark, its facade the same grey stone as its neighbors, its door of faded dark green with no number. But the longer Harry looked at it, the more the unremarkable quality felt deliberate, the way a good muggle-repelling charm made things not just invisible but boring. Your eyes slid off it, your attention went elsewhere, there was nothing here to see. Only it wasn't working properly on Harry, because the beacon in his hand was pointing at it with every degree of certainty it possessed, and Harry had long since learned to trust the things that were made specifically for him. He looked at the door. The keyhole was larger than standard and slightly unusual in shape, not round but a faint pentagon, 5-sided, and when Harry looked at it the beacon made the same sound it had made when he'd first touched it in the cupboard. The sound of a breath before speech. It wants you to use it on the lock, Hermione said softly. Harry stepped forward. He pressed the beacon to the keyhole. The fit was exact, not a guess, not an approximation, but the fit of something made to go in a specific place. The beacon slid into the keyhole and the rings rotated in a sequence, outer, then middle, then the innermost for the first time, one sharp rotation, and the door swung inward. Cool air came out. Old air. The particular smell of a room that had been sealed and preserved and waited. Beyond the door was darkness and the faint blue glow of something magical, and Harry stood in the doorway for 1 second and felt the weight of 15 years of patience compressed into this single moment, Sirius making this, James helping, the two of them building something and hiding it and walking away from it and never getting to see it opened. He stepped inside. Chapter 3, The Gathering. The lights came on by themselves. Not all at once, that would have been dramatic in the wrong way, the theatrical flourish of someone who wanted to impress. These came on the way a person came awake in the morning, gradually and in stages, the blue glow strengthening from the corners first, then spreading along the ceiling, then settling into something warmer and steadier that made the room feel occupied rather than empty. As though the house had been waiting for exactly this and was now simply getting on with it. Harry stood just inside the door and looked. It was a single large room on the ground floor, running the full depth of the narrow building, with a staircase on the left and 2 closed doors at the back. The furniture was old but not decrepit, a long worktable down the center, shelves covering most of the right-hand wall from floor to ceiling, a pair of armchairs near the front window that was blacked out on the inside with a charm that looked hand-applied. Everything had a thin coat of dust that spoke to 15 years of undisturbed sleep, but the structure was solid, the preservation charms had held, and the magical glow had the clean quality of something that had been well maintained by the building itself rather than allowed to deteriorate. On the worktable, set out with deliberate precision, were objects. Not randomly stored, laid out. Waiting. Hermione came in behind him and made a sound that was half breath and half something more complicated. Ron came in last and turned a slow circle taking in the shelves, which were densely stacked with books, files, folded parchments, and objects Harry couldn't immediately identify. Right, Ron said, very quietly, in the tone of someone updating their assessment of a situation significantly upward. Don't touch anything yet, Hermione said, and then immediately crossed to the nearest shelf and started reading spines. That was quick, Ron said to Harry. She said you shouldn't touch anything. Reasonable, honestly. Harry walked to the worktable. The objects laid out on it were clearly curated. This wasn't the random accumulation of a storage room, it was a selection. Someone had chosen these specific things and put them in this specific order, and that choice had meaning. He moved down the table without touching anything, just looking. A map, rolled and tied with a strip of leather. A set of 6 small files containing something dark that shifted between brown and green when the light caught it. A second journal, different from the one Harry had found at Privet Drive, thicker, its cover dark red rather than brown. A folded piece of parchment sealed with the same plain black wax as the letter. A wooden case no bigger than a shoebox, its lid fastened with a simple catch. And at the far end of the table, in a purpose-built brass stand that matched the beacon's material exactly, a space that was clearly meant for the beacon itself. Harry set the beacon in the stand. The fit was as exact as the keyhole had been. The moment the beacon settled into its housing, the room responded, the lights brightened by a degree, a low hum that Harry had half noticed as background noise resolved into something fuller and more present, and on the walls behind the shelves, faint lines appeared. Not decorative. Structural, the geometry of the building's magical framework, made briefly visible, the way you could sometimes see a bone through skin when the light caught it right. The building was alive, in the specific way that places lived when they'd been properly keyed to a magical purpose and fed the right magic for long enough. Not sentient. Not responsive the way the beacon was responsive. But active, humming with absorbed intention, the enchantments his father and godfather had laid into it still functioning with the perfect reliability of work done by people who knew exactly what they were doing and had done it with care. Harry. Hermione had a book open and was pointing at the wall of shelves with the hand that wasn't holding it. These aren't just books. Half of these are restricted texts. Proper restricted texts, not Hogwarts restricted, which just means first years aren't supposed to have them. These are texts that the Ministry classified under the Dangerous Knowledge Act of 1974. You can't find most of these in any public library. Of course not, Harry said. Sirius wouldn't have stocked a cache with things you could find in a public library. No, but, Harry, one of these is the complete annotated edition of Magical Warfare, British Doctrine 1685 to 1945. That's a text the Ministry confiscated every copy of after the First War. Dumbledore has been trying to locate a copy for 20 years according to, she stopped. According to what? She hesitated. The look on her face was the one she wore when she'd found something that changed the shape of what she thought she understood. According to a footnote in a Ministry education paper I read last year. The paper was arguing for curriculum restrictions. It cited the warfare text as an example of knowledge that produces, and I'm quoting, dangerous student independence. The room was quiet for a moment. Dangerous student independence, Ron said. Yes. Meaning students who can defend themselves without needing to be supervised. That's what the footnote implies. Ron looked at the shelves for a moment with an expression that was moving through several stages quite quickly. Right, he said again. Right, okay. Harry picked up the sealed parchment from the table. He broke the wax, same plain thumbpress as the letter, same serious handwriting inside, though this one was more organized, less rushed, written at a different time. Harry, if you've made it here then the beacon worked, which means either James's blood charm was as good as I thought or I got incredibly lucky, and knowing James it's the former. This place belongs to the Black family but nobody in the family knows it exists. My grandmother built it in 1943 and told nobody, which was the only good decision she made in her entire life. I found the deed in the back of a drawer when I was 17 and chose not to mention it to my parents, which was one of the better decisions I made in mine. What's in this room is what James and I decided you'd need. We made decisions together, we agreed on the books, the equipment, the files, those are protean shield ingredients, the directions are in the red journal, they're not hard. The beacon stand is bolted to the table, don't move it. The wooden case, open it last. Not because it's dangerous. Because it'll make more sense last. The map is the building. All of it, the ground floor is what you can see, there are 2 more floors and a basement. The basement took me 3 weeks and I'm prouder of it than almost anything else I've ever done. Explore it when you've settled. The red journal is mine. Not James's, mine. His is the one you found first. I wrote this one knowing it would be read by someone who didn't grow up with the context, so I tried to be clearer than I usually am. Remus tells me I'm not naturally a clear writer. He's not wrong. Bring people you trust. Not because you can't manage this alone, you can, and you will, but because the Marauders were never just one person and they were better for it, and you will be too. The building will accept people you've decided to trust. There's no charm for it. It just reads the decision. I've left you everything I could. Everything James and I built and learned and borrowed and invented. Everything the Order should have given you and didn't, because they were too busy protecting you from the war to understand that the war was the thing you needed to be prepared for. You're going to be extraordinary. Your father already knew that. I agreed with him, which I didn't always do, and he was insufferable about it. Sirius P.S. The basement has a training room. Use it. P.P.S. The kitchen is upstairs. There's a self-stocking larder, just tell it what you want and it'll take care of it from the Diagon Alley Market. James set it up. He was very pleased with it. I thought it was showing off. It isn't. It's brilliant. Don't tell him I said that. Harry read the last 2 postscripts twice and felt something in his chest do something complicated and quick, grief and affection and humor all threaded together in a way that made it impossible to separate them, the way Sirius had always made things feel. The "Don't tell him I said" that aimed at a man who'd been dead for 14 years, written with the natural ease of someone who hadn't yet learned to speak of their best friend in the past tense. He folded the letter carefully. "What does it say?" Ron asked. Harry handed it to him. Ron read it, then handed it to Hermione, and there was a short silence while she read it, in which the building hummed around them and the beacon sat in its stand and everything waited. "The basement training room," Ron said. He sounded the way he sounded when someone showed him a particularly elegant chess move. "He built them a training room." "He built us a training room," Harry said. Are we moving in?" Ron asked this with the studied casual tone of someone who had already decided the answer was yes and was verifying it for form. "I think that's what bring people you trust means." "Okay." Ron looked around the room again with the expression of someone concluding a rapid inventory. "I need to tell Mum something." "Tell her you're staying with me," Harry said. "Which is true. She'll want an address. We'll give her one." Hermione was already opening the red journal. "I need at least 2 days with these books before we do anything else," she said, not looking up. "There are texts here that directly address some of the things we've been unprepared for, the warfare text alone, Hermione." Harry waited until she looked up. "We have time. Explore first." She considered this for approximately 1 second, then closed the red journal and said, "Fine. But I'm coming back to this." "Obviously." They explored. The building was narrow but deep, as old London buildings tended to be, each floor a surprise. The first floor had a kitchen that was the size of a reasonable sitting room and laid out with the particular organization of someone who cooked for multiple people as a matter of routine, a long table with 8 chairs, a larder that hummed with a subtle magic when Harry opened it and produced a self-updating list of its contents on the inside of the door. A fireplace connected to the flue network, the connection evidently dormant but serviceable. Hermione examined the hearth and said she could reactivate it in an afternoon. The second floor was sleeping quarters. 4 rooms, which seemed either prescient or coincidental until Harry remembered that Sirius had written "Bring people you trust" with a specific and directional confidence, and thought perhaps prescient was the right word after all. The rooms were Spartan but functional: beds, desks, wardrobes, windows that looked out onto a narrow light well rather than the street, which meant nobody passing outside would see candlelight at odd hours. One of the rooms had books already on the desk, chosen with obvious intentionality, 5 volumes of defense theory stacked in a sequence that was clearly meant to be read in order. Harry stood in the doorway of that room and understood without needing to think about it that this one was his. "How did he know there'd be 4 of us?" Ron asked, standing in the hallway between the rooms. "There were 4 Marauders," Harry said. Ron thought about that. Right. Yeah. He was always going to think in 4s. They found the basement by the simple mechanism of following the stairs down past the ground floor to a door Harry almost missed because it didn't have a handle, just a smooth surface with a small indentation that turned out to be exactly the right size and shape for the beacon, which Harry had carried down with him. The door opened into the kind of space that made Ron stop in the doorway and not say anything for several seconds. It was large. Much larger than the building's footprint should have allowed, which meant either the building sat on a significantly wider lot underground or, more likely, Sirius had expanded it with the same casual illegality that characterized most of his architectural decisions. The walls were stone, bare and clean, with strengthening runes cut into them at regular intervals. The floor was clear. The ceiling was high. Along the far wall was a rack of practice equipment, dummies, shield targets, cushion barriers, the kind of setup a serious Auror training room would have and most Hogwarts students never saw. To the right, a smaller room within the room contained a bookshelf, different books from upstairs, these ones practical manuals, spellwork texts, combat theory, and a workbench with materials for charm modification. To the left, a long narrow space that looked designed for running. In the center of the main floor, someone had laid a single practice target and pointed it at the room's entrance. Like they were expected. 3 weeks, Ron said. What? Sirius said the basement took him 3 weeks. He built this in 3 weeks. He shook his head slowly. Honestly, what a madman. The best kind, Harry said. He crossed the room to the central target, examined it, and then turned to face the length of the space. He hadn't cast a combat spell properly, not with space and intention and real focus behind it, since the graveyard. He had not let himself think too carefully about that. He raised his wand. He cast. The spell hit the far wall with a crack that echoed off the stone, and the runes lit up briefly as they absorbed the impact, and Harry stood there for a moment feeling the residual energy in his arm and thought, yes. That was the word. Not a complicated response. Just yes. He was good at this. He'd always been good at this. He'd been told to be careful with that knowledge and he was done being careful with it. He cast again. Faster. Show off, Ron said, but he was grinning. They spent 2 hours in the basement. It was, Harry thought afterward, the best 2 hours he'd had since before the Triwizard Tournament. Not because of what they accomplished technically, though they accomplished plenty. Hermione's Protego variants were, as she modestly refused to describe them but which Harry and Ron both clearly understood, considerably beyond standard, and Ron's transfiguration instinct for environmental adaptation was the sort of thing that would have impressed McGonagall if McGonagall had been there to see it. But the shape of it was right. Working together in a space built for exactly this, no observers, no point system, no performance review. Just the work itself. They went back upstairs at noon and Harry told the larder sandwiches, soup, whatever's easiest, and it produced a decent lunch in approximately 4 minutes, and they sat around the kitchen table and ate and nobody tried to be significant about it. We need to tell Neville, Harry said. Hermione looked up. And Luna, he added. Harry, Hermione. He said it calmly. The letter says people I trust. I trust Neville. I trust Luna. They're in this whether we include them or not. If something kicks off at Hogwarts this year and we haven't brought them in, that's on us. He picked up his soup spoon. And Neville specifically, Neville's been training with us for 2 years and everyone treats him like he's the warm-up act. He isn't. You know he isn't. Hermione considered this for long enough that Harry knew she agreed and was simply making peace with it. How do we contact them without going through the order? Directly, Harry said. Same as you came here. Same as Ron came here. He looked at Ron. Ron, can Pig handle 2 more letters? Pig can handle anything, Ron said, with the fond exasperation of a person who meant this literally. I want them here, Harry said. Not just looped in by letter. Here. We'll need 4 people for what comes next. What does come next? Hermione asked. The wooden case. He looked at the table. We haven't opened it yet. You said we'd open it last. We've explored. We've eaten. It's last. He pushed his bowl to the side. Let's go. They brought the case upstairs to the kitchen table because the ground floor room felt too much like a receiving area and the kitchen felt like the right kind of room for something that mattered. Harry set it on the table and sat down and looked at it for a moment. It was simple, dark wood, plain brass catch, no obvious enchantments on the exterior, nothing to suggest what was inside. Harry thought about the deliberateness of its placement at the end of the table and felt the same calibrated patience he'd felt when he found the beacon. Something built by people who understood sequencing. Something last for a reason. He opened it. Inside, on a bed of dark velvet, were 5 things. The first was a pair of glasses. Not just any glasses, identical to Harry's own, same round frames, but with something on the lenses that caught the light differently. He picked them up carefully and looked through them and the room looked the same, until he held them up toward the shelf on the far wall and, in the lens's reflection, he could see faint geometric patterns in the air between himself and the shelf that weren't visible to the naked eye. Active enchantments. The glasses showed magic in the world around them, layered, the way a geologist's tool showed strata in rock. He put them on. The room lit up with information. The beacon's brass stand on the ground floor was visible through the kitchen floor as a soft warmth. The preservation charms on the walls ran in clean lines like circuitry. The larder glowed steadily. And in the center of the room, around the table, in the air where the three of them sat, faint threads, pale and warm, not alarm system red but something more like amber, running between him and Hermione and Ron with the unmistakable quality of magical signature. "What do you see?" Ron asked. "Everything," Harry said. He took the glasses off because it was too much to look at all at once, not overwhelming exactly, but requiring a calibration he hadn't had time to develop. He set them carefully aside. The second thing in the case was a small leather folio, not the journal, different, slimmer. Harry opened it and found a series of maps, hand-drawn, of specific parts of London with magical locations marked in a code he'd need the red journal to interpret. Useful, clearly. He set it beside the glasses. The third thing was a folded piece of cloth that unfolded to about twice the size of a handkerchief, plain gray, nothing remarkable, until Harry touched it and felt the specific resistance of extremely good disillusionment work, more effective and more durable than a standard charm, built into the fabric rather than applied to it. He looked at the stitching around the edge and saw, worked into the seam in tiny letters, a Marauder's map-style signature, Mooney's contribution. Lupin. Remus had helped with this. Harry held the cloth for a moment. The fourth object was small and golden, not galleon-sized, smaller, more like a shirt button, flat and smooth. He turned it over and on the back found a single engraved letter, M. He looked at Hermione. "Protean charm," she said, leaning forward. "Like the galleons I made for," she paused. "Like DA communication. If there are more of these somewhere, there probably are." She picked up the folio and quickly leafed through the maps. "There. Last page." She set it open on the table. A sketch of 6 identical buttons, with notations beside each. H, P, J, M, R, and one with an asterisk and the note, Keeper, Sirius. 6. The 4 Marauders, clearly, James, Sirius, Remus, Peter, except Peter's had been removed from the sequence by the simple brutality of history, leaving P assigned to nobody and replaced with an asterisk. And 2 others. H, Harry's own. And a 6th. "Who's the 6th?" Ron asked. "It's blank," Hermione said. "Spare," Harry said. Or, he thought about it. Or for someone they expected. Someone they knew would come into this eventually. He set the button down carefully. Fifth thing. The fifth thing in the case was, at first glance, simply a piece of paper. Muggle paper, not parchment, folded twice. Harry unfolded it and found a single sentence in James Potter's handwriting. "Do more than survive." 4 words. No signature, no date, no additional context. Just that. Harry looked at them for a long time. Ron and Hermione read it over his shoulder and nobody said anything for a moment, because some things had the quality of landing in the exact center of a person's chest and requiring a second before speaking was possible. "Okay," Ron said finally. "Okay," Harry agreed. He folded the paper and put it in his inside pocket with Sirius's letter. They spent the rest of Saturday setting up. It was the kind of task that was good for a person, concrete, physical, purposeful, with clear progress markers and a satisfying end state. Hermione organized the shelves on the ground floor with the focused intensity she reserved for significant library projects, ordering the texts by subject and then by urgency and putting a small flag on the 6 she needed to read first. Ron went back down to the basement and did a proper inventory of the training equipment, bringing a list back upstairs that had annotations about condition and what needed replacing. Harry explored the remaining corners of the building and found, in a small closet on the first floor, a box of communication mirrors, 6 of them, the size of a hand, backs engraved with the same M as the buttons. He brought those to the kitchen table. By the time the London afternoon was going golden through the blacked-out windows' faint gaps, the cache felt occupied. Lived in the way the letter had implied it should be. Harry wrote to Neville that evening. He wrote carefully, because Neville deserved careful. Not an urgent summons, not the kind of vague "I found something important" he'd sent Ron. Neville was sharp and perceptive and would come if asked, and deserved the respect of being told at least the outline of why. He wrote 3 paragraphs explaining what he'd found, what the cache was, and what he was asking. He wrote a 4th paragraph that just said, "You're better than you've been given credit for, and I've known that for a while. I want you in on this." He handed the letter to Hermione's owl. Hedwig was still ranging over London somewhere, and he'd summon her when he needed her, and let it go from the kitchen window into the Saturday evening. Luna's letter was shorter because Luna would not need the context in the same way, not because she was less sharp, but because Luna operated on a different axis of trust, one that wasn't predicated on information. He wrote 2 sentences and his name and knew she'd understand. They ate dinner around the kitchen table as the city settled into its evening sounds around them, the distant traffic of London, the particular quiet of a street that was technically occupied but mostly bypassed, the building humming its steady, inhabited hum. "This feels different," Ron said, somewhere into the meal. "From what?" Harry asked. "From how things usually are when we're about to do something." He thought about this. "Usually we're figuring it out as we go, and everything's on fire, and we're 3 steps behind whatever's happening." He gestured at the room. We're ahead of it. We've got a place. We've got resources. We've got time," Hermione said. "Yeah. Time." Harry thought about Umbridge, who was currently being appointed to a position at Hogwarts that none of them knew the precise details of yet, but whose shape was becoming clear from the fragments in the Daily Prophet he'd been reading. He thought about Voldemort, building his army in the quiet. He thought about Dumbledore and the order and the careful management of information that had characterized every year of his time at Hogwarts. "We've got maybe 5 weeks before term," he said. 5 weeks before all of it starts again, Umbridge, the Ministry, whatever Dumbledore's planning and not telling us. He looked at the basement door. "I want us in that room every day. I want us in those books every day. I want," he paused, finding the right way to say it. "I want us to walk back through those castle doors as something different from what we were when we left." "Different how?" Ron asked. Harry thought about "do more than survive." "Better," he said simply. Neville's response arrived Sunday morning, delivered by a large family owl that landed on the kitchen table and regarded them all with the self-possessed calm of an owl that knew its own importance. The letter was 2 sentences. "When and where?" N.P.S. "Gran thinks I'm going to visit a school friend." "She's not wrong." Harry laughed at that, a real one, unguarded, the kind that Ron immediately joined without asking why, which was one of Ron's best qualities. Luna's response arrived an hour later. It wasn't a letter. It was a page torn from what appeared to be a personal sketchbook, and on it was a drawing, quite good, actually, of 5 figures standing in what was clearly a building interior, drawn in Luna's distinctive slightly unreal style where proportion was approximate but expression was precise. The 5 figures were clearly Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville, and Luna herself. They were, in the drawing, facing outward. Ready. There was no text except at the bottom, in Luna's small, round handwriting, "I've been waiting to be asked." The 4 of them, plus 2 more incoming, had a base, a library, a training room, a set of tools built by 2 of the best magical minds of their generation, and the complete and specific inheritance of a man who had loved Harry with the practical, furious, building kind of love that didn't wait for the right moment but made one. Outside the kitchen window, London moved in its enormous, indifferent, magnificent way. Inside, the beacon hummed in its stand on the ground floor. The archive was still sealed. But it was, Harry felt with a certainty he couldn't explain and didn't need to, getting closer to opening. Chapter 4, What the Marauders Left Behind. Neville arrived Monday afternoon looking like someone who had run most of the way from the night bus stop, which he had. He came through the door with his bag half open and a cut on his chin from where he'd apparently walked into a low-hanging sign on the street outside. He'd been looking up at the building's unremarkable facade trying to reconcile the address Harry had given him with the nothing his eyes kept sliding past, and the sign had one. He stood in the entrance of the ground floor room and looked at the shelves and the work table and the beacon in its stand and the lights, and then he looked at Harry with an expression that was working very hard to appear calm and not entirely succeeding. "This is real," he said. "Very," Harry said. "When you said you'd found something, I know." Neville set his bag down. He walked to the work table and looked at the objects still laid out on it, the files, the folio of maps, the wooden case now sitting open and empty, the beacon in its stand at the end. He didn't touch anything, just looked, and Harry watched him and thought about what Hermione had said last night after they'd read Neville's two-sentence response. He's going to be exactly right for this. She'd said it in the way she said things when she'd been thinking about them for longer than the conversation suggested. "Your godfather built this," Neville said. "He and my father." Neville turned from the table. His expression had settled into something Harry recognized, the look Neville wore when he'd decided something and was done with the deciding part. It wasn't a dramatic look. It was quiet and complete, the kind of resolution that didn't need to announce itself. "What do you need me to do?" "Read," Hermione said from the shelves, where she had been operating since approximately 7 that morning. "Then train. Then we'll talk about what comes after." "In that order?" "In whatever order makes sense," Harry said. Luna arrived the next morning. She came with a small trunk, a birdcage containing no bird but what appeared to be a small collection of interesting stones, and a copy of the Quibbler tucked under her arm. She walked into the ground floor room, looked at the beacon for a long moment with her head at its characteristic slight tilt, and said, "It's sad, isn't it? But the good kind of sad." Harry looked at the beacon. "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly it. My father wrote about resonance archives once. He said they were like a room that someone very important had been in and then left, but the room remembered them." She set down her trunk with the unhurried ease of someone arriving at a place they'd already decided to be at home in. "Where am I sleeping?" Hermione showed her upstairs. Harry heard them talking through the floor, Hermione's explanatory tone, Luna's occasional questions, which were the kind that made you re-examine your assumptions, and went back to the red journal he'd been working through since early morning. Sirius's writing was different from what Harry had expected. He'd known Sirius as a man who expressed himself in bursts, explosive affection, sudden anger, the kind of passion that filled a room and then was gone. But the writing in this journal was patient. Methodical. Sirius explaining things he knew thoroughly with the care of someone who understood that clarity was itself a form of love when the reader needed it. The first third of the red journal was theory, defense, offense, the philosophy of magical combat, which turned out to be a far more interesting subject than Harry had anticipated. Sirius had opinions. Strong ones, set down with characteristic directness. He believed, and argued at length, that the primary failure of Auror training in the 20th century was an over-reliance on dueling forms at the expense of adaptive thinking. "A duel is a formal disagreement," he wrote. "A fight is different. Most Aurors are trained for one and encounter the other, and the gap between them has cost lives. You don't train for duels. You train for fights, and a duel is just the polite version." Harry read that paragraph 3 times. He thought about every defense lesson he'd ever had. Lockhart's theater. Lupin's careful, brilliant practicality. Moody, the real Moody's, brutal effectiveness. Snape's contemptuous efficiency. He thought about the graveyard, which was not a duel. He thought about what it had taken to survive the graveyard and how much of that had nothing to do with anything he'd been formally taught. He turned the page and kept reading. The second third of the journal moved from theory into specifics, specific spells, specific combinations, specific tactical approaches to specific threat categories. Not the sanitized versions in Hogwarts textbooks. The real versions, the ones that worked in actual circumstances against actual people who were trying to kill you. Sirius wrote about them clinically and without drama, the way an experienced surgeon described procedure, and Harry found that the absence of dramatization made them more real rather than less. He was on page 94 when Ron's voice came from the basement door. "Harry. You need to come down here. Something in Ron's voice made Harry close the journal and go. Ron was standing at the bottom of the basement stairs holding what appeared to be a folded parchment that had been tucked inside the cover of one of the training manuals on the practical shelf. He held it out. Harry took it, unfolded it, read it. It was a list. James Potter's handwriting, the vertical confident script Harry was learning to recognize on sight. Dated October 9, 1981, 11 days before the night everything ended. The list was titled, simply, Things Harry Should Know How to Do. It was 2 pages long. Harry sat down on the training room floor and read it. Some of the items were practical, specific spells, techniques, skills. Some were strategic, how to read a situation, when to hex first and when to wait, how to assess the difference between a threat and a performance. Some were personal in a way that made reading them feel like trespassing on something private, except it was meant for him, it was entirely for him. He should know he's funny, James had written at item 37. We've been told I'm funny and Sirius is funny and Remus is dry, but actually I think Harry will have all 3, and he should know that matters. The ability to make people feel at ease is as tactically important as any hex. Item 43, he should know that being afraid of his own power is the trap. Being powerful and choosing not to use it is an option. Being powerful and being told to hide it is a cage, and he should be able to tell the difference. Item 51, the last one, he should know we would have been proud of him no matter what. But I think we're going to be incredibly proud. Harry sat with the list in his hands for a long time. Ron was sitting against the far wall, giving him the space to do that, not speaking, which was the version of Ron that most people missed if they didn't know him well, the one that understood when words were the wrong tool and chose the right one instead. Eventually Harry folded the list and put it in his pocket with Sirius's letter and his father's 4 words. He had a collection growing in that pocket, a pocket full of dead men's certainty, which should have felt bleak and didn't, because it didn't feel like loss. It felt like being handed something. Right, he said. Right, Ron said. Show me what you found. Ron had found 2 things beyond the list. The first was a complete set of practice equipment that he'd initially assessed as standard but which, on closer examination, was heavily modified. The training dummies weren't passive targets but had been charmed to react, to move, to respond to incoming spells with defensive counterspells of their own, escalating in difficulty based on the caster's demonstrated ability. The second was a section of wall behind the training equipment rack that responded to pressure at a specific point by sliding back to reveal a room within the room, narrow, stone, containing a workbench and materials that Harry looked at and didn't immediately understand. Hermione came downstairs and understood them immediately. Curse-breaking materials, she said, moving to the bench and examining the contents with the precise, rapid assessment of someone who had read extensively about exactly this. Proper curse-breaking, not the safety versions. Gringotts level. There's an instruction manual here. She pulled a slim volume from a shelf above the bench. This is a professional field manual. Sirius or James must have gotten this from a contact inside Gringotts. Can you learn it? Harry asked. I need a week with this manual and I'll have the basics. She set it down and turned around. But Harry, these materials alone would be classified as controlled possession under the Ministry's current guidelines. I know. I'm not saying we shouldn't, I know, Hermione. She looked at him for a moment. I'm just noting it for the record. Noted. He looked at the workbench. Put it in your reading list. They established a rhythm over the next 3 days that felt, Harry thought, like what Hogwarts was probably supposed to feel like but never quite had because of the structure of it, the bells and schedules and the constant management of time by someone else's priorities. Here the priorities were theirs. They read in the mornings, all 5 of them working through different texts from the shelf system Hermione had organized, occasionally surfacing to share something significant or argue about an interpretation or ask a question that opened into a whole other conversation. They trained in the afternoons. The training sessions developed quickly from individual practice into something more collaborative and considerably more interesting. Harry worked with the reactive dummies and found that the escalating difficulty system meant he was never comfortable, which was exactly the right environment for genuine improvement rather than the refinement of already competent performance. The dummies responded to his hexes with counterspells that he had to read and respond to in real time, no preparation, the kind of adaptive thinking Sirius's journal had argued for and that Harry had been doing instinctively for 4 years without knowing it was a discipline. Neville turned out to be, in the context of a space specifically designed for real training rather than formal curriculum, remarkable. Harry had watched him for 3 years struggle with the performance anxiety of being watched and judged, the particular kind of paralysis that came from failing in public often enough to expect failure. In the basement, without an audience beyond 4 people who were entirely on his side, Neville was different. Not transformed, he was still Neville, still warm and careful and perpetually slightly apologetic, but the anxiety was gone, and what was underneath it was sharp and specific and absolutely not warm-up act territory. His instinct for herbology-based defensive magic was something none of them had seen fully deployed before. On the 3rd afternoon, when they ran a group exercise against the reactive dummies, all 5 of them working in tandem, different roles, Harry and Ron taking the offensive load, Hermione maintaining shield work, Luna doing something idiosyncratic but oddly effective with distraction enchantments. Neville produced a root and binding combination that immobilized 2 dummies simultaneously with a complexity and speed that made Ron stop completely and say, "Neville." "What?" Neville looked mildly embarrassed. "I've been practicing," he said. "Privately." "For how long?" "Since 2nd year, mostly." "2nd year," Ron repeated. I didn't want to do it wrong where people could see." Harry thought about item 43 on his father's list. Being powerful and being told to hide it is a cage. "Don't do that anymore," Harry said. Neville looked at him. "Don't practice privately because you're worried about doing it wrong where people can see. Do it where people can see and do it wrong and fix it. He gestured at the room. "That's the whole point of this." Neville was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, once, simply, and that was that. Luna's combat style, once she got properly comfortable in the training room, was the most genuinely difficult to categorize. She didn't work from conventional spell patterns at all. She worked from observation. She would watch an opponent for what seemed like too long, completely unhurried, and then produce something perfectly specific that addressed the actual structure of the situation rather than the surface of it. Harry had never seen anyone fight like that. It was slow to begin and then abruptly, decisively effective. He mentioned this to her on the 3rd evening over dinner. "I notice things," she said. "I know. But you do something with what you notice that I don't know how to teach." Luna considered this. "Most people respond to what something looks like," she said. "I respond to what it is. They're usually different." She ate a bite of the soup the larder had produced. "Your beacon is about to do something new." Harry looked up. "What?" "I don't know exactly. But it's been different today. The hum changed this morning. Slightly higher." She tilted her head. Like someone about to speak. Harry got up from the table and went downstairs. The beacon was in its stand, outer rings at the configuration it had settled into 2 days ago. He stood over it and looked and felt it. The warmth was different. Luna was right, there was a quality to it today that was distinct from yesterday, a kind of charged stillness, the quiet before something. The hum was marginally higher. He pressed his right hand to the surface. The innermost ring moved. Not a small adjustment. A full rotation, smooth, deliberate, with the quality of a key turning in a well-made lock. The outer rings held completely still. The middle ring held still. Just the innermost one, turning, and as it turned the surface markings rearranged themselves into a pattern Harry hadn't seen before, something more complex and layered than the directional instructions or the simple ready. Tomorrow. It looked like a face. Not literally, not a portrait, not an image. But the configuration of marks had something in it that read as expression, as presence. The beacon was preparing. He could feel it, the way you felt weather coming or a room change before anyone had spoken. He stood there with his hand on the beacon and his eyes on the innermost ring and felt his heartbeat slow down in the way it always did when something significant was about to happen, the strange calm that had been his constant companion in genuinely dangerous moments since he was 11 years old. "It's going to open," he said, to nobody in particular. "I know," Luna said from the stairs, where she was watching with her silvery eyes wide and quite still. "Not tonight." "No." She looked at the beacon with the expression she wore when something made sense to her in a way she didn't need to translate. "When everyone's here." Harry looked at her. "Everyone's here." "Not yet." He went back to the kitchen and ate his dinner and thought about that. The next morning, he woke at 6 and lay in bed and listened to the building and let himself think about what was coming. Hogwarts in 5 weeks. Umbridge installed and operational. The Ministry's campaign against the idea that Voldemort was back, which meant a campaign against Harry by extension, because Harry was the living inconvenience of that fact. Dumbledore's silence. The Order's protection that was also, quietly, a management of what Harry was allowed to know and be. He thought about the cash. What it represented was not just resources, though it was that, and not just continuity with his father and godfather, though it was that too. It represented a fundamental disagreement with how things had been done. James and Sirius had built this because they believed a person fighting a war needed to be genuinely equipped for it, not shepherded through it by people who loved them too carefully to trust them properly. He thought about what Hermione had read, Dangerous Student Independence. The Ministry's language for exactly what was happening in this building. Good, Harry thought. He got up and went downstairs and put the kettle on and opened the red journal to where he'd left off, and by the time Hermione appeared at 7 he'd read another 30 pages and had 4 dense pages of notes and was working through a shield charm variant that Sirius described as considerably more effective against dark curse impact than the standard Hogwarts version. "I've been thinking," Hermione said, sitting down with her tea. "I know. The curse-breaking manual. And the protean communication buttons. And the map folio." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "Sirius didn't just leave us a training facility. He left us an infrastructure for operating independently. The cache isn't a hiding place. It's a base." "Yes." Which means he anticipated that there would be a reason to operate independently of official structures. He knew what the Order was, Harry said. He was in it. He knew its limits. He trusted Dumbledore, Hermione said, carefully. He trusted Dumbledore and he still built this. Harry looked at his notes. "Those two things aren't contradictory, Hermione. You can trust someone and still know that their way of doing things isn't the only way. Or isn't your way." She was quiet for a moment, her tea cooling in her hands. "I've been thinking about the Ministry," she said. "About Umbridge specifically. I found her name in one of the books on the shelf, The Political History of Magical Britain, Post-War Period. She's been advocating for what she calls managed magical education since 1989. Which means controlled curriculum. Which means, removing anything that makes students capable of independent defense." "Precisely." Hermione's voice had the particular flatness it acquired when she was very angry and managing it tightly. "She's going to remove defense against the dark arts as a practical subject. Replace it with theory. With the Ministry's approved version of theory, which means no actual magic." She set down her mug. "And Fudge is backing her because Fudge is terrified of Dumbledore producing an army and he's using Umbridge to dismantle the infrastructure of any student who could be dangerous." "To Voldemort," Harry said. "To anyone the Ministry hasn't authorized." The room was quiet. "Right," Harry said. "Then it's good we've got this." The afternoon's training session was the best one yet. Harry worked through the escalating dummy sequence alone first, then with Ron, then as a group rotation with all 5 of them in different configurations. What emerged, without discussion, was something that looked like a formation, not rigid, not the kind of thing you drew on a map and executed in order, but organic, responsive, 5 people who were beginning to understand each other's instincts well enough to complement rather than overlap. Hermione on shields and rapid response enchantment work. Ron on spatial control, using the environment, transfiguring cover and moving obstacles. Neville on binding and immobilization, an anchor function that turned out to be exactly as valuable as an offensive role. Luna doing the thing she did, watching, waiting, finding the specific vulnerability of a specific situation. And Harry on offense, moving fast, not holding back. It was in the 4th rotation that Harry stopped pulling his spells. He'd been calibrating instinctively, the habit of 5 years of Hogwarts training where full-force offensive work wasn't appropriate in a classroom environment. He caught himself doing it and made a deliberate choice to stop. He hit the next training dummy with the full weight of what he could actually do, which was, he knew and had always known and had been shaped by circumstance to understate, considerable, and the dummy staggered back against the wall and the runes flared briefly and it took 3 seconds for the enchantment to right itself. Then it came back with a counterspell combination he hadn't seen before, more complex than any previous escalation. 2 spells threading in from different angles. Harry read them in the half-second he had and moved, not dodged, moved into the gap, letting one pass to his left and deflecting the other with a single wrist movement, and hit the dummy again before it could cycle to the next pattern. The room was briefly quiet. "Well," Ron said. "Okay. You've been going easy," Hermione said. "This whole time." "Old habit." "Stop," she said flatly. "I just did." "Good." Neville said nothing, which Harry appreciated. There was nothing to say. Harry was good at this and had always been good at this, and performing otherwise was, his father had given him the word. A cage. He was done with it. They ate dinner on the evening of the 4th day with the satisfaction of people who had done real work and felt it in their bodies and their brains both. The conversation was good, loose, ranging, the kind of talk that happened between people who were becoming a team rather than just a group. Ron told the story of Fred and George's involvement in his escape from the burrow, which was complicated and hilarious and ended with a reference to something involving extendable ears and Percy's bedroom door that nobody asked him to expand on. Luna described an article her father was writing about what she called the Ministry's endemic Nargle infestation, which Harry had long since learned to treat as Luna's personal symbolic language for institutional corruption and which in this case seemed quite apart. Neville described his grandmother's reaction to his departure, which had been more positive than expected because Augusta Longbottom had apparently taken one look at his face and said, "You look like you've made a decision," and sent him off with the family practice wand as a spare. "She knew?" Harry asked. "Gran always knows," Neville said. "She just doesn't always say." The 5th day Harry woke before 5. He dressed in the dark and went down to the ground floor and sat in front of the beacon and didn't say anything, just sat there cross-legged on the floor with the early morning silence of London around him and the beacon's warmth and the hum that Luna had called different. He thought about Sirius. Not the grief of it. He'd made a kind of peace with not being able to think about Sirius without the grief, it came with the territory and he wasn't going to fight it, but about who Sirius was. The man who'd built this. The man who'd been 21 years old and already thinking about what a child he loved might need 15 years in the future. Who'd argued with Dumbledore and lost and then quietly gone ahead and done what he thought was right anyway, not in defiance but in parallel, with the clear-eyed pragmatism of someone who understood that loving someone and trusting someone's judgment were not the same thing. The building hummed. The beacon's innermost ring moved, not the full rotation of yesterday, just a tremor, a settling. "When everyone's here," Luna had said. Harry turned the thought over. 5 people were here. 5 seemed right, for Marauders +1, the structure of it, but, he looked at the golden buttons in the wooden case, which he'd left open on the table. 6 buttons. H, P, J, M, R, minus Peter, replaced with no one. And a spare. 6 total. 5 here. He sat with that. He wasn't going to jump to conclusions, but he was also, by now, fairly practiced at recognizing the shape of a thing before he could name it. Sirius had built this knowing Harry wouldn't come alone. The building accepts people you've decided to trust. The letter said that explicitly. 4 sleeping rooms. 6 buttons. A structure that felt inherently plural, inherently Marauder formed, not one person's operation but a group's. 5 here. He thought about the 6th button. He thought about who his father and Sirius might have anticipated, in the particular way that people who loved you could sometimes see the shape of your life before you'd lived it. He didn't land on a name. He held the question and let it wait, because some things needed to arrive in their own time, and he'd learned that lesson from a beacon that had waited 15 years and ticked at exactly the right moment. He stayed on the floor until he heard Hermione moving upstairs, and then he got up and put the kettle on and opened the red journal to page 117 and kept reading, and outside the narrow windows of the cache the London morning came in by degrees, grey first and then gold, the city assembling itself from darkness with the same ancient, indifferent, extraordinary energy it had always had. The beacon hummed on. Chapter 5, Umbridge Moves Hogwarts in September had a smell. Harry had forgotten it over the summer, or not forgotten exactly, but the memory of it had faded into the general background of everything else that needed thinking about. Walking through the entrance hall on the 1st of September, after the carriages and the lake and the long anxious press of students through the castle doors, the smell came back in full, old stone and candle wax and something cool and particular that was neither of those things but existed alongside them, the smell of a building that had been full of people and magic for 1,000 years and had absorbed both so deeply that they were structural now, as much a part of the castle as the walls themselves. Harry breathed it in and felt 2 things simultaneously. The first was the involuntary homecoming of a person who'd spent most of their most important years in a place and couldn't entirely separate it from who they were. The second was the clear-eyed recognition that this year was going to be different, and not in the way last year had been different, and not in the way any previous year had been different either. Different in a way he'd chosen. He was at the Gryffindor table for the sorting with Ron on his left and Hermione on his right and Neville across, and Luna was at the Ravenclaw table where she caught Harry's eye once and gave him a small nod that communicated more than a conversation would have. They'd left the cache the day before, having spent 12 days there. 12 days that had changed the architecture of what Harry thought of when he thought of himself. Not dramatically. Not overnight. But definitively. He'd brought the beacon back to Hogwarts in his trunk, inside the lead-lined compartment the device had been buried in, which he'd removed from the Privet Drive cupboard before leaving. He'd brought the red journal, the golden buttons, one in his pocket, one each given to Ron, Hermione, Neville, and Luna with no ceremony, just here, this is how we stay in contact, and the Moony cloth, which he'd been experimenting with and understood better now. He'd left the cache stocked and locked and warded, the beacon stand empty and waiting for the device's return, the building sealed behind the 5 of them as they stepped back into the street. He'd stood outside on the London morning and looked at the unremarkable facade and thought, we can come back. That thought had carried him through King's Cross. The sorting happened. The hat's song had an edge to it this year that Harry noticed and filed away, a warning woven into the tradition, which meant the hat saw something too, something systemic and concerning that it was choosing the only channel available to it. He watched Dumbledore's face during the song and Dumbledore's face was carefully neutral, which in Harry's experience meant Dumbledore was thinking something significant and had elected not to show it. He looked away before Dumbledore could glance at him. Then Dumbledore introduced Dolores Umbridge. Harry had formed a picture in his mind from what Hermione had found in the political history text and from the fragments in the Prophet over the summer. The picture he'd formed was more or less accurate in its elements but had gotten the texture wrong. He'd expected something colder, something more visibly severe, the bureaucratic harshness of Percy at his worst multiplied by institutional power. What sat at the staff table was none of those things. She was a small woman in pink, and she smiled with every degree of warmth her smile was capable of producing, which was a great deal of warmth, and all of it utterly without content. The smile went nowhere. It didn't reach her eyes, which were large and slightly protruding and moved around the room with a deliberate thoroughness that Harry recognized as the professional variety, not curiosity, assessment. She was reading the room the way an inspector read a failing business, noting everything, and doing it behind the perfect cover of the smile and the pink and the bow in her hair. When she spoke over Dumbledore in a way so smoothly executed it took a second to register as the power move it was. Hem. Harry went very still. The cough, and it was a cough, a deliberate affectation of a cough, chosen and deployed like a tool, brought the hall to a specific quality of quiet. Not the respectful quiet of an audience for Dumbledore. Something slightly more confused, slightly more uncertain, the quiet of people who hadn't decided yet how to respond to this. She spoke into it with the pleasant precision of someone who had done this before, in many rooms, and had learned exactly how much pleasantness was required to make a power play feel like a social nicety. The Ministry has never been so strongly committed to building our relationship with Hogwarts. Ron's elbow found Harry's ribs. Harry didn't look at him. He was watching Umbridge, specifically watching her eyes, which were still moving. They stopped on him. Not briefly. For long enough to be deliberate. The smile didn't change. The eyes were entirely still. Then they moved on, professionally, as if the stoppage had been coincidental. It wasn't coincidental. He ate his dinner without tasting it and thought. She knew who he was, obviously. That was not the information. The information was in the duration of the look and the quality of the stillness, the look of someone who had a specific brief, who had been given a file, who was here with at least one objective that had his name on it. She hadn't been sent to Hogwarts incidentally and found him here. He had been part of the calculation. She looked at you, Hermione said, very quietly, not turning her head from her plate. I noticed. Not the way teachers look at students. No. The way, she paused, finding the right frame. The way someone looks at something they've been told to deal with. Yes. Ron, on Harry's other side, was eating his roast beef with the expression of someone who was listening to everything and processing it carefully while performing the universal cover story of dinner. The staff table, he said quietly. McGonagall's face. Harry looked at the staff table without appearing to. McGonagall was eating with the rigid precision of someone who had been deeply offended by something recently and was managing it through the application of impeccable posture. Beside her, Flitwick was unusually focused on his food. Sprout was talking to Hagrid with a slightly deliberate energy, as if filling silence she didn't want. The staff table had the body language of people who had received unwelcome news and were absorbing it professionally. Whatever Umbridge's appointment meant exactly, the staff already knew and didn't like it. The next morning confirmed it. Harry had defense against the dark arts first period, a fact he'd registered at breakfast with the kind of resigned readiness of someone who expected a thing to be bad and was simply prepared for the specific shape of the bad. What he hadn't fully prepared for was how immediately and completely she established control. She walked in with her clipboard and her pink and her smile and she established the terms of the room before anyone had opened their books. No practical magic. Theory only. Ministry-approved curriculum. Wands away, please. She said please with perfect pleasantness in a tone that communicated the request had the force of a decree and the sweetness was decorative. The class looked at Harry. He looked at Umbridge. She was watching him with the smile fully deployed, waiting. He could feel the architecture of what she'd built in 30 seconds, the classroom as a controlled space, the terms of engagement preset, the implicit challenge, respond or don't, either way I've established the parameters. He opened his textbook. Not because he was intimidated. Because he was thinking. She spent the first 20 minutes of the lesson outlining her philosophy of magical education, which was the Ministry's philosophy delivered in Umbridge's pleasant voice, and which boiled down, stripped of the careful language she wrapped it in, to the proposition that Hogwarts students had no need to learn how to actually defend themselves because the Ministry's forces would do that for them. Harry listened to this with his hands flat on the desk and his face neutral and his brain cataloging every specific phrase she used and comparing it to what he'd read in the political history text. She was word perfect. She wasn't improvising. This was a prepared position, rehearsed and deployed. 23 minutes in, she said something about current ministry-approved interpretations of defensive magical theory, and Harry looked up from his book and said, in a perfectly conversational tone, "Theory isn't the same as preparation." The room went very quiet. Umbridge turned from the board. The smile stayed. "I'm sorry. Theory isn't the same as preparation," Harry said again, the same tone. Not aggressive. Straightforward, the way his father had been straightforward, the way Sirius had been when he thought something was simply true. If we're going to be tested on practical defense by the actual world, then a curriculum that's only theory is a preparation for a test that isn't the one we're going to have to take. Umbridge's eyes were completely still. "The Ministry's position, I'm not arguing with the Ministry's position," Harry said. "I'm noting a structural problem with it. The practical problem is that the skills this course used to teach are the ones students will need regardless of what the curriculum says about them." "Are you suggesting," Umbridge said, with the careful pleasantness of someone laying a legal foundation, "that the curriculum is inadequate?" "I'm suggesting that theory without practice is incomplete. That's not a Ministry question, it's just, true." He held her gaze. "Professor Lupin taught practical defense. So did Professor Moody. The skills they taught are the reason several people in this room are alive." The room was very quiet. Hermione, to Harry's left, had her quill poised above her parchment and was very still. Ron had stopped writing entirely. Neville, 3 rows back, was looking at the window with an expression of extreme careful neutrality. Umbridge looked at Harry for 3 seconds. Then she wrote something on her clipboard. A small sound, the scratch of her quill. She did it without looking down. "Detention," she said pleasantly. "Thursday evening. My office." She turned back to the board. "Page 4, please." Harry turned to page 4. The detention was, he'd been fully prepared for it to be, something. He went Thursday evening and sat in her office, which was already decorated with enough plates of kittens to constitute a psychological statement about the gap between the domestic and the institutional, and he wrote lines for 2 hours. He wrote with his own quill, not the black quill she produced with the air of someone testing whether a student knew what it was. He looked at it and looked at her and said, "I'll use my own, thanks," and sat down. She watched him process that choice. He processed it by beginning to write. Lines, 2 hours, his hand cramping by the end, his face neutral throughout. She sat at her desk and worked through parchments and occasionally looked up to assess him and found nothing useful to assess. When the 2 hours were done he put his quill away and stood and said, "Good evening, Professor," with perfect courtesy and left. He walked back to Gryffindor Tower with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had sat across from a very specific kind of power and not given it anything to work with. Ron was awake when he got to the dormitory. "Well. Lines. That's it. That's it." Ron thought about this. She wanted a reaction. Obviously. So she got nothing. She got nothing. Ron lay back on his pillow with a satisfied expression. Right. The first 2 weeks of term established a pattern, which was Umbridge tightening her grip on the defense curriculum in ways that became more formally structured every few days, a new educational decree posted on the notice board, the text of each one a little more far-reaching than the last, each one signed with the Ministry's authority and Umbridge's name. Harry read each one, noted what it covered and what it conspicuously didn't cover, and didn't react. He didn't react publicly, which was different from not reacting. Privately, in the evenings after dinner, in the room of requirement which Harry had found in his second week and recognized immediately as the most useful room in the castle, the 5 of them worked. They brought what they'd started in the cache into Hogwarts, modified for the constraints of the school environment, less space, less equipment, more risk of discovery, entirely manageable. The room of requirement gave them what they needed, which changed session by session, a full training space one evening, a well-stocked library the next, a comfortable room for planning the night after that. Harry ran the sessions without running them, which was to say the structure emerged from what the group needed rather than from an agenda he'd set in advance. This was something he'd learned from the Marauder texts, the difference between leading and directing, between a group that followed and a group that was pointed in the same direction for reasons they'd chosen themselves. It made for slower starts and considerably more effective results. Hermione had been in the restricted shelf texts every spare moment since returning to Hogwarts, reading with a speed and retention that Harry had always known was extraordinary but which in the context of texts this significant was almost alarming. She surfaced periodically to share things that shifted the group's understanding by degrees: new defensive variants, revised understanding of curse mechanics, context for spells they'd been taught without context. She was also, with a precision that impressed Harry and slightly unnerved Ron, developing a working theory of Umbridge-specific strategy. "She's not just here to restrict the curriculum," Hermione said on a Wednesday evening, the room of requirement configured as a comfortable study space, all 5 of them ranged around a large table. "That's the visible operation. The actual operation is, she's building a case." "A case for what?" Neville asked. "For removing Dumbledore." The room absorbed that. "Fudge wants Dumbledore gone," Hermione continued. "He's been afraid of Dumbledore using Hogwarts as a power base since the end of last year when Voldemort." She paused, with the minor hesitation she still had on the name, and then continued without it becoming a thing, "when Voldemort returned and Dumbledore told Fudge and Fudge refused to believe it. Fudge's position now depends on maintaining the narrative that Voldemort isn't back, which means maintaining the position that Harry is lying, which means Dumbledore backing Harry's account is politically dangerous to Fudge. So Umbridge is here to find grounds." She tapped her notes. "She's documenting everything. Every deviation from her prescribed curriculum, every staff member who fails to comply with her decrees, everything Dumbledore does that can be framed as building toward private political power." "She's going to try to take the school," Luna said. "She's going to try to establish ministry control over the school," Hermione corrected. "Which amounts to the same thing, practically." "And us?" Harry said. "You specifically are both a target and a tool," Hermione said. "You're a target because you're the public face of the inconvenient version of events. You're a tool because," she chose her next words carefully, "because if she can get you to respond in a way that's publicly problematic, an outburst, an incident, something she can document and present as evidence of the kind of instability she wants to associate with your account of what happened, that does double work. It discredits you and gives her grounds for action." "She's been baiting me," Harry said. "Every detention. Every loaded question in class. Every decree that she posts directly in front of you." Hermione held his gaze. "She's good at it." "She's very good at it," Harry agreed. "She hasn't gotten anything. Which is making her recalibrate." Hermione had the look she wore when she'd worked through something completely and was presenting the conclusions. A student who doesn't react is a harder target than one who does. "She'll escalate. Let her." "Harry, let her escalate," he said again, without heat. "I know what she's doing." "Knowing is most of the defense." Luna was looking at the middle distance with her particular expression of lateral thought. "She doesn't know about the beacon," she said. "No. She knows something happened at Privet Drive," Hermione said. "I found a reference in the educational decree precedents. There's a clause about magical devices of unknown origin in the possession of minors. It's specific. Too specific." She picked up a parchment from her pile. This clause wasn't in previous versions of the decree framework. It was added this summer, and the language describes, very precisely, a blood-keyed magical artifact with active enchantment capabilities. The table was quiet. "She knows about the beacon," Ron said flatly. "She knows something exists," Hermione said. "She may not know exactly what it is. But someone told the ministry that something significant was activated at Privet Drive over the summer, and Umbridge was briefed, and she's here in part because of that." Harry thought about this. The beacon's activation would have had a magical signature. He'd known that from the first night, the hum, the warmth, the sense of something old and powerful becoming active after a long sleep. Dumbledore's people monitored Privet Drive for magical activity. They'd have noticed something. And if they'd noticed, there was a chain of information that could have reached the Ministry. Does Dumbledore know? Harry asked. Hermione hesitated. Hermione. I think, yes. I think Dumbledore probably knows that something activated at Privet Drive. Whether he knows what it is, she paused. The beacon is a Black family construction. Pre-Ministry, old magic. It's possible even Dumbledore doesn't know exactly what it is. But he knows something happened, and he said nothing to you about it, which is, she stopped herself. Which is consistent, Harry said. Yes. Her voice was carefully neutral. Harry didn't say anything for a moment. He was thinking about Dumbledore, not the Dumbledore of recent years, the one who looked past Harry in hallways and communicated through intermediaries and managed information with the precise control of someone who believed they were carrying too much for anyone else to safely hold. He was thinking about the Dumbledore who had put him at Privet Drive over Sirius's objection. Who had made a decision about what was best for Harry without giving Harry a voice in it, and who had been right about some things and wrong about others, and who loved Harry in a way that Harry believed was genuine and which was nonetheless not a sufficient reason to stop thinking for himself. She's going to make a move before Christmas, Harry said. An escalation beyond detentions and decrees. Something more structural. Agreed, Hermione said. So we have, he calculated. 2 months, probably. 2 months before this becomes something that requires us to respond visibly. We should use the 2 months, Neville said. He said it with the same quiet directness he'd been developing since the cache, the quality of someone who had stopped waiting for permission to say the thing he thought. That's exactly what we're going to do, Harry said. The third week of term brought something Harry hadn't anticipated, an audience. He'd been careful. Not secretive exactly. Secrecy for its own sake was never his style, and he'd learned from Sirius that hiding capability was a trap. But measured. They used the room of requirement in the evenings and didn't advertise it, they sat in their normal places in all their classes, they behaved, publicly, like Hogwarts students having a Hogwarts term. The beacon stayed in his trunk. The red journal stayed in his bag, looking like a standard school notebook. Nothing visible. But something was visible, even so, in ways that didn't announce themselves. The group of 5 moved through the castle differently. Not louder, quieter, actually, a purposeful quiet, the kind that came from having something to do and knowing what it was. Harry went through his days with a focus that had been missing since before the Triwizard Tournament, and which, apparently, communicated something to the people around him. Ginny Weasley cornered him on a Thursday after breakfast. She did it with the direct efficiency that characterized her approach to most things, appeared beside him as the great hall emptied, matched his pace, and said, without preamble, "Something's happening." Harry looked at her sideways. "Good morning, Ginny." "Good morning. Something's happening and you're at the center of it and I want in." "In on what?" "Whatever it is." She kept pace with him easily, small and determined and entirely unmoved by the non-answer. Ron's different. Neville's different. Even Hermione's different, and Hermione is the person who changes least from a baseline. Something happened over the summer and you all came back from it, and I'm asking directly rather than trying to figure it out indirectly because directly is faster. Harry stopped walking. He looked at her. She looked back at him, brown eyes entirely steady, waiting. He thought about Luna saying when everyone's here. He thought about 6 buttons. He thought about a 6th sleeping room in the cache that they hadn't discussed. He thought about his father writing "Bring people you trust." He thought about Ginny Weasley at 12 years old in a chamber full of dark magic and a basilisk, writing back to Tom Riddle because she was lonely and isolated and had no one else to talk to, and surviving it, and coming back from it with a resilience that most people her age didn't have and that she wore as quietly as she wore everything. He thought about her on a Quidditch pitch flying with the kind of instinct that didn't come from practice alone but from something inherent, something structural in how she understood space and motion and risk. He thought about 6 buttons and a 6th person and the beacon's archive, still sealed, and Luna's when everyone's here. "How are you with a wand?" he asked. Ginny blinked. Then the corner of her mouth moved. Better than Ron. That's a higher bar than people think. I know. Can you meet us at 8 tonight? I'll tell you the room. Yes, she said, immediately, no deliberation. Don't tell anyone else yet. Obviously. She started walking again and then glanced back. Harry, whatever this is. I'm not afraid of it. I know, he said. That's why I'm asking. He arrived to the room of requirement that evening 5 minutes early to find Hermione already there with her arms folded and an expression that said she'd been thinking about this since she'd heard. Ginny, she said. Ginny, Harry confirmed. I think, she paused and Harry waited. I think that's right. Luna said, I know what Luna said. Hermione unfolded her arms. I've been thinking about it since she said it. 6 buttons. The 6th room in the cache. A 6th sleeping space in a building designed for exactly the number of people who needed to be there. She looked at him. Your father and Sirius knew you'd have a core group. They built it for 6. They were 4. They built it for you. Which means they built it for whoever you needed. Ron arrived at 7:58 with Neville and Luna together, and Ginny arrived at 8 exactly, looked around the room that had configured itself into a training space for 6, noted the 6 people present including herself, and looked at Harry with an expression that was somewhere between vindicated and genuinely moved. Harry handed her the 6th golden button. She turned it over in her palm. The 6th Marauder, she said softly. Something like that, Harry said. Good, she said, and pocketed it. They worked for 2 hours. Ginny's wand work was exactly what she'd said it was, better than Ron, which meant considerably better than average, and she slotted into the group's formation with an adaptability that suggested either excellent instincts or excellent observation of what the group was already doing, probably both. She and Neville developed a binding and cover combination within 40 minutes that neither of them had clearly planned but both of them clearly found natural. At 10 o'clock the room shifted slightly around them, the first indication it gave when the evening should wind down, and they sat down and drank the water the room had provided and Hermione opened her notes. Before we finish, she said. I found something in the warfare text today that I think we need to talk about. They looked at her. Umbridge's next move, she said. I think I know what it is. And I think we have approximately 3 weeks. The room was quiet. Outside the castle, the Scottish autumn was settling into the hills, the nights coming in earlier and colder, the sky over the lake dense with stars when the clouds broke. Somewhere in Harry's trunk, in its lead-lined compartment, the beacon hummed. Its innermost ring had been turning slowly all day. Chapter 6, The Voice in the Brass. The beacon opened on a Tuesday. Harry knew it was coming before it happened, had known since Sunday, the way you knew weather before it arrived, a pressure change in the quality of the warmth from his trunk, the hum audible now without pressing his ear to the wood. Monday he'd sat next to it in the dormitory after everyone else was asleep and felt the innermost ring turning with a steady, purposeful rotation that was categorically different from every previous movement. Not searching. Not calibrating. Arriving. He didn't tell the others until Tuesday evening, when they gathered in the room of requirement and he set the beacon on the floor in the center of the space and said, Tonight, I think. They sat in a loose circle around it. All 6 of them. This was the first training session Ginny had attended since the initial one, having spent 2 days learning the theoretical context from Hermione with the focused speed of someone making up for lost time. She sat cross-legged between Luna and Neville, the golden button in her fingers, turning it over the way Harry had noticed she did when she was thinking. The room had configured itself differently tonight. No training equipment, no shelves. Just space, and the right quality of light, warm but not intrusive, the kind of light that existed in rooms where something important was happening and didn't want to get in the way of it. Harry hadn't asked for this configuration. The room had made it. He'd stopped being surprised by the room of requirement's intuition. He set the beacon in the center of the circle and sat back. It was already different. The outer rings had settled into a stillness he'd never seen before, not the active stillness of processing or navigation, but the complete, held stillness of something at the end of a long journey. The innermost ring, which had been turning for 2 days, made one final rotation and stopped. And then something happened that had no mechanical explanation. The beacon's surface stopped being brass. Not literally, it was still physically the same object, still metal, still the same dimensions, but the surface changed quality, became something that wasn't quite opaque and wasn't quite transparent, something that described itself in light rather than in form. The markings on the surface ran through a final configuration and then disappeared entirely, leaving the surface clean and still, and the warmth from it became warmth that was different from warmth, the specific temperature of a room you'd been in before and known as safe. Harry felt it in his chest. A recognition his body had made before his brain caught up. "Oh," Luna said very softly. The room around them shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly, but the quality of it changed in a way that Harry suspected only the 6 of them could feel, a kind of density in the air, the weight of something important that had compressed itself across 15 years and was now, finally, unfolding. The sound started quietly. It began in the beacon itself, a resonance that built from the same hum Harry had lived with since July, but deeper, fuller, structured in a way the hum had never been, not vibration but something that organized itself into timbre, into tone, into the specific and irreducible quality of a human voice clearing its throat. Not Sirius's voice from Azkaban. Not the hollowed, careful voice of the man Harry had known in a cave by the sea, or in his parents' old kitchen, or through a fireplace, the voice that had spent 12 years being ground down and had rebuilt itself imperfectly. This was Sirius Black at 21 years old. It came out of the beacon like light came out of a window, naturally, filling the room from the center outward, everywhere and nowhere specific, the resonance archive doing what James Potter's notes had said it would and what Harry hadn't entirely believed until now, not reproducing a voice but being one, the full magical impression of a man who'd been alive and laughing and building things and had sat down in October 1981 and pressed himself into brass and velvet and hoped. It was the most alive thing Harry had ever heard from a dead person. Right. Okay. I'm going to do this properly, which means I'm going to do this once, because James says if I do it more than once I'll just keep changing things and it'll never be finished, and he's correct about that in a way I find irritating. A pause. The voice gathering. Harry. My name is Sirius Black. I'm your godfather. You're 2 months old right now, sitting on the kitchen floor of your parents' house at Godric's Hollow, eating something you found on the floor that your mother has decided to be calm about. You're very pleased with yourself. You look exactly like James with your mother's eyes, which is the most unfair distribution of genetics I've ever seen, and I cannot tell you how utterly gone on you James is. It's embarrassing. He cried when you first smiled. He told me he didn't, but I was there. Ron made a sound. Harry looked at him briefly. Ron's jaw was set and his eyes were bright and he was looking at the beacon with the expression of someone absorbing something that was going to take a while to fully land. If you're hearing this, then I didn't make it to you. That's a breath. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't cost something to say. It costs a great deal, actually, so let me just hold it a moment. And the archive held it. Silence, exact and full, the silence of a person genuinely pausing, not performance, just the real breath of a 21-year-old boy standing in the knowledge that the future might not include him. Harry's hands were completely still on his knees. Okay. Here's what I want you to know. The first thing is about your parents. Your father is, James Potter is the best person I've ever known and I've known him since we were 11 and I don't say that lightly or out of loyalty. He's brilliant and he's funny and he's got a temper like a lit match and a heart that is genuinely enormous in ways he will go to considerable lengths to disguise because he thinks it's embarrassing. He would do anything for the people he loves. He already has, and he'll do more, and whatever he did in the end, whatever the shape of it was, I promise you it was that. It was love, not heroism. Though with James, those were usually the same thing. Ginny had her hand pressed flat against her mouth. Harry didn't look at her because looking at anyone right now felt like it would break something that needed to stay unbroken for the duration of this. Your mother. Your mother is Lily Evans Potter, and I'm going to be completely honest with you, I was wrong about her for years. I thought she was too sharp, too careful, I thought she took herself too seriously. I was an idiot. She is the most genuinely courageous person I have ever met, and I have met Albus Dumbledore, and she has a quality he doesn't, which is that her courage never calculates. It just goes. She loves you in a way that I think has changed the actual physics of the situation. I don't know how else to explain what she's done. She found a way. Lily always finds a way. The room was entirely still. The second thing is about you specifically. We know about the prophecy. Harry's breath caught. James found out the shape of it, not the exact words, through a channel I'm not going to name here. Enough to know that Voldemort has heard something, enough to know why he's coming for you. And I need you to hear me on this, Harry, the prophecy isn't the point. I don't care about the prophecy. Your father doesn't care about the prophecy. We care about you. A prophecy tells you the shape of what might happen. It doesn't tell you who you are or what you're capable of or what you choose. The prophecy is Voldemort's problem, it's what he's afraid of. Your job is to be too busy being yourself to let it define you. You're not a weapon. You're not a symbol. You're not the boy who lived, which is a phrase I find utterly reductive, and if anyone's calling you that when you're old enough to find it annoying, you have my full permission to be annoyed. Harry felt something that was entirely involuntary move through him, not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, something that occupied the space between the two. Third thing. Dumbledore. The voice changed register slightly. Not colder, but more careful. The care of someone who respected a thing and had strong opinions about it simultaneously. He's the most extraordinary wizard alive. He has done things and carried things and held things together that nobody else could, and I believe completely that he loves you in whatever way Albus Dumbledore is capable of love. I am not asking you to distrust him. I'm asking you to understand that he makes decisions the way empires are run, the whole is the concern, the parts are the means. He will love you and use you simultaneously and believe, honestly believe, that the love makes the use acceptable. And you are going to have to decide whether that's a relationship you accept, modify, or reject, and I cannot make that decision for you. I built the cache because I wanted you to have a choice. Not a rebellion, a choice. The ability to say, yes, I understand the larger picture, and here are the things I'm deciding for myself. The cache is what choice looks like when it has preparation behind it. A pause. Shorter this time. Fourth thing. This is the important one. Ready? We have watched you for 2 months. You are going to be, there are no good words for this. You are so thoroughly and specifically yourself already. At 2 months old you have a personality as clear as glass and it is entirely yours. Stubborn and warm and observant and funny, and I watched you figure out how a toy worked this afternoon for an hour, just worked at it patiently until you understood it, and then you looked at me like you'd solved a puzzle I'd set for you. You had no idea how good that was. You were just doing it because you wanted to know. Whatever you've been told about who you are, by the world, by people who think they understand what you represent, there's a version of you underneath that's just you. Just the person. The one who looks at a problem and works it until it's solved and then looks up for the next one. That's the one I built this for. Not the symbol. Not the survivor. You. Harry couldn't feel his hands. He was aware, distantly, of Hermione's fingers around his left wrist. She'd reached over at some point without him noticing, and her grip was firm and warm and completely steady, which was Hermione entirely. Last thing. If I'm gone, if I didn't make it, if this is the thing you're hearing instead of my voice in a room somewhere, I want you to know that I have no regrets about any decision I made where you were the reason for it. Not one. You were worth everything I built and everything I would have done and everything I didn't get to do. The fact that you exist and are sitting somewhere hearing this makes everything I was and everything I believed in feel justified. Purposeful. Real. Your father says the same. He doesn't know I'm adding this part, but he says the same. I know because I know him. Go. Fight. Win. Not for the prophecy. Not for the symbol. For the people you love and the world you want and the version of yourself that's been waiting to be fully shown. Do more than survive, Harry. We'll be watching. The voice stopped. The beacon's warmth faded over 30 seconds, not extinguished, not gone, but quieting, settling into the same low background hum it had always had. The surface returned to brass. The rings were still. The archive was empty now, its single charge spent, its purpose fulfilled. The room was very quiet. Outside the castle, the wind moved across the lake with the long, low sound of autumn doing what autumn did. Inside, 6 people sat in a circle around a brass device in the specific quality of silence that followed something that had changed the permanent nature of things. Harry didn't move for a long time. He was aware of the room. Aware of the 5 people around him, Ron's careful stillness, Hermione's hand on his wrist, Neville looking at the floor with his jaw working, Luna sitting with her eyes closed and an expression of profound gentleness, Ginny with her head bowed and the golden button held in both hands. He was aware of the beacon. He was aware of himself. The thing in his chest was large and complicated and he was going to need time with it. Not now. Now was for sitting in the same space as it and letting it exist. Do more than survive. He'd been carrying that on a piece of paper in his pocket for 2 weeks. He'd read it the first time and understood it intellectually and been moved by it. He heard it now in the voice it had been written for, Sirius's voice, alive and 21 and already gone but refusing to stay gone, built into brass and time and love, and he understood it differently. Structurally. Not as instruction but as inheritance. The fight was coming. Not the fight of last year, which had been survival and chaos and grief and no preparation. The real one, the deliberate one, the one he'd been pointed at his whole life and toward which the last 2 weeks had been, finally, real preparation. He was ready. Not invulnerable, not perfect, not beyond the reach of fear or loss. But ready in the way the beacon had waited to see in him, the readiness that was made of knowledge and work and choice and the willingness to be exactly what he was without apology. He picked up the beacon. It sat in his hand warm and quiet, lighter somehow than it had been before, the way something is lighter after it has given what it was carrying. He held it for a moment and then looked up at the group. All right, he said. His voice was steady. The steadiness wasn't effort, it was just where he was. Hermione. You said 3 weeks. She took a breath and straightened. Her eyes were red but her voice was clear. She's going to make a move against Dumbledore directly. An inquisitorial squad, I found the legal framework for it in the educational decree precedents. She can appoint student enforcers under Decree 29, give them authority over other students, use them to gather information. It bypasses the prefect system completely and gives her intelligence-gathering capability inside the castle. She paused. Malfoy will be first. Of course he will, Ron said. He sounded completely like himself, which was the most stabilizing thing in the room. Malfoy's been angling for sanctioned power since first year. She hands him a badge and an excuse and he'll use both. The squad isn't the point, Hermione said. It's the precursor. Once she has enforcers and enough documented violations, she can petition the ministry for what's called high inquisitorial authority, effectively temporary control of the school pending a ministry review of Dumbledore's leadership. She looked at Harry. That's the end game. Not removing the defense curriculum. Removing Dumbledore and installing ministry control of Hogwarts. When? Ginny asked. The decree precedents require 20 documented violations before the petition can be filed. I've counted her current documentation, she's at 11. With the squad gathering information, Hermione paused. 3 weeks, maybe less. So we have 3 weeks before she has the grounds to move on Dumbledore, Harry said. At most. He thought about this with the particular clarity that had been his constant companion since the cache. Not anxiety, just the clean architecture of a problem. 3 weeks. Umbridge at 11 of 20 violations and building. A student inquisitorial squad incoming. A targeting brief on Harry that was documented and active. And on their side, a training group of 6, a baseline of preparation that was considerably beyond what Umbridge would expect, knowledge of her strategy, and the specific advantage of being underestimated by everyone except possibly Dumbledore. She can't get to 20, Harry said. How do we stop her? Neville asked. We don't give her violations to document. Harry looked at the group. We've been keeping the evening sessions quiet. We keep them quieter. The decree against student organizations, when does that come? It already has, Hermione said. Educational Decree 24. Any student organization, club, or gathering of 3 or more students requires High Inquisitor approval. When was it posted? Yesterday. I saw it this morning. Which means everything we've done up to now is clean, the decree didn't exist yet. He thought about it. But from now, the room of requirement is essential. Nothing that can be observed, nothing that can be documented. We work and we don't perform. And the detentions? Ron asked. She needs me to escalate, Harry said. She needs an outburst, something she can take to the ministry as evidence of dangerous instability. I've been giving her nothing and she's been adjusting her approach. She'll push harder. He met Ron's eyes. I won't escalate. Whatever she does. Harry, Ron stopped. What? She's going to go past frustrating, Ron said. She's going to go past detentions. I've been watching her and Ron looked for the right word, she's the kind of person who escalates their own methods when the standard ones aren't working. She's going to hurt you. The room waited. I know, Harry said. And you're still, yes. He said it without qualification. Whatever she does in that office, I don't give her what she wants from it. Because what she wants is a reason. I'm not going to give her a reason. Ron held his gaze for 3 seconds. Okay, he said. Okay. The way he said okay the second time carried something that was too big for the word, but Ron was using it anyway, which was very Ron. There's one more thing, Hermione said. They looked at her. Dumbledore knows something happened at Privet Drive this summer. I'm now fairly certain he knows about the cache. She kept her voice even. Not the details necessarily. But the magical signature of the beacon's activation, the pattern of a Black family resonance archive opening tonight, Dumbledore has instrumentation in this castle that monitors significant magical events. He'll know the archive opened. Will he come to us? Neville asked. He hasn't yet, Harry said. He hasn't said a word to me since term began. He looks past me in the corridors. He said it plainly, without the bitterness that might have colored it a few weeks ago. He knows and he's choosing not to engage with it, which means he's either waiting for me to come to him or he's decided that what I'm doing isn't a threat to his version of events. Or he trusts it, Luna said. Everyone looked at her. He might trust what the beacon is, she said. Sirius built it. Sirius trusted Dumbledore even while disagreeing with him. Maybe Dumbledore knows that whatever Sirius built, it's safe for Harry to have. She tilted her head. He might be leaving it alone on purpose. Harry thought about that for a long time. Maybe, he said finally. He meant it, not dismissing the possibility. Either way, he's not stopping us. And he's not telling Umbridge. No, Hermione agreed. He's definitely not telling Umbridge. Right. Harry stood. The others followed, the comfortable, unremarked synchrony of people who had been working together long enough to read each other's shifts. We've got 3 weeks to build something she can't document and can't dismantle and can't use. We've got the room. We've got the cash for the holidays. We've got what's in those books and what's in that training room. He looked at each of them in turn. What we don't have is time to waste. They filed out of the room of requirement in pairs, Hermione and Ron together, Neville and Luna, Harry and Ginny, leaving through the tapestry corridor at intervals so as not to present as a group to anyone watching the castle halls. Standard practice, one of the first things Harry had implemented after the decree against organizations. In the corridor, Ginny fell into step beside Harry without speaking. They walked for 30 seconds in silence. That was Sirius, she said. Yes. The real one. Not a memory of him. Not, he was there. That's what a resonance archive is. Harry looked at the stone floor moving under his feet. James's design. Sirius's voice. 15 years. She was quiet for a moment. He told you to do more than survive. He and my father both. She glanced at him sideways. Her expression was careful and warm and entirely without pity, which was the exact right combination. You're going to. I know, Harry said. He meant that too. He went back to the dormitory when the others had gone their separate ways and sat on his bed in the dark for a moment with the beacon in his hands. It was quiet now, genuinely quiet, the post-archive quiet of a thing that had given its most important thing and was now in a different phase of its existence. Not useless, the directional function still worked, the blood keying still worked, the warmth and the hum were still there. But different. He thought about Sirius pressing his voice into this, pressing himself into it, sitting in some room somewhere in October 1981 and doing it with the knowledge that the most likely reason Harry would hear it was that Sirius would never be able to say any of it in person. He thought about a 21-year-old making that trade, presents for preparation, the now for the later, and doing it because that was the form his love took when circumstances demanded it. He thought about his father writing Do More Than Survive and knowing, when he wrote it, that surviving was the part Harry was going to have to get through first. He thought about Lily Evans Potter, who his mother's letters had been, who Lupin had described, who Sirius had called the most courageous person he knew and meant it. Who had found a way. Who had made a piece of herself into armor and wrapped it around her son and the armor had held for 14 years and was still holding. He set the beacon on his nightstand. He lay back. Outside the dormitory window, the Scottish night was enormous and cold and full of stars between the moving clouds, and somewhere in the castle Umbridge was awake and working, building her case one documented violation at a time, and somewhere else Voldemort was doing what Voldemort did, and somewhere in London a narrow building sat quiet and ready and full of everything Sirius and James had built. And in Harry's pocket was a piece of paper with 4 words and in his chest was a voice that was 15 years old and entirely alive. He slept. He dreamed, for the first time he could remember, of his parents. Not the flash of green light. Not the screaming he'd associated with them his whole life, the trauma memory dressed as dream. Just, a kitchen. James laughing at something. Lily looking up. A baby on the floor looking at a toy with focused, patient, stubborn attention. He woke at 6 with the dream fading and the early light coming in and the specific quality of a person who has understood something in sleep that they hadn't understood while awake. He got up. He opened the red journal to page 132 and kept reading. There was a great deal of work still to do. Chapter 7, The Ministry Blinks. The Inquisitorial Squad appeared on a Monday. Harry came down to breakfast and knew before he reached the Great Hall because of the particular quality of noise in the entrance, not louder than usual but differently textured, the conversational buzz of a student body that had absorbed new information and was processing it in the specific way news processed through a school, quickly, inexactly, and with considerable embellishment. He walked through the doors and saw the badge on Malfoy's chest immediately because Malfoy was standing near the Slytherin table at an angle designed to make the badge visible to the maximum number of people, which was such a pure expression of Malfoy's personality that Harry almost found it funny. Almost. The badge read Inquisitorial Squad in the Ministry's official typeface, the same font as the decrees on the notice board, which was presumably intentional. 5 other students wore them: Crabbe, Goyle, Pansy Parkinson, a 6th-year Slytherin Harry didn't know well, and, which was the genuine surprise, a Ravenclaw 5th-year named Edgecombe who Harry had seen in the library and who he'd always assumed was reasonable. He sat down at the Gryffindor table, filled his plate, and looked at Ron. 11 days, Ron said quietly, with the specific tone of someone whose prediction has come in early. 12, Hermione said, appearing from nowhere in the way she did when she'd been up since 6 and had already established the day's information baseline. The precedent I found suggested 3 weeks minimum. She's moving faster. She set her own plate down and looked at Harry. Which means her violation count is moving faster than I calculated. How? Harry said. She's interpreting loosely. Hermione's voice had its flat quality. The decree against organizations, she's applying it retroactively to established groups. The Quidditch teams were challenged this morning under an expanded interpretation. She's arguing that any recurring student gathering requires renewed approval. She's trying to shut down Quidditch. Ron's voice went up half a register. She's trying to generate violations, Harry said. The actual target isn't Quidditch. It's the violation count. She doesn't care if it holds up legally, she just needs the number. Across the hall, Malfoy had clocked Harry looking and arranged his face into the expression he wore when he felt institutionally protected, which was a specific kind of smug that Harry had been reading accurately since first year. He said something to Crabbe that made both of them look toward the Gryffindor table. Harry looked back at his eggs. She needs 9 more, Hermione said. I've been tracking. She's documented 11 confirmed, disputed the Quidditch challenge this morning which would be 12, and there are 3 pending reviews on her desk that I have reason to believe exist. Harry looked at her. How do you have reason to believe that? Hermione looked at her pumpkin juice. I've been careful. Hermione. I haven't broken any rules, she said. I've simply been paying very close attention to publicly visible documentation and making logical inferences. The decree postings are public record. The timings are public record. The pattern is inferable. Right, Harry said. He didn't push it because the method didn't concern him and the information was valuable. So she needs 9, possibly 6. She's interpreting loosely. The squad is her intelligence mechanism. Malfoy will come after you first, Ron said. Obviously. Not in a way you can respond to. He'll look for something documentable, something he can bring back to Umbridge with evidence. Ron ate a piece of toast with the practical thoroughness of someone settling in for a complex discussion. He's not clever enough to set a sophisticated trap, but he's persistent and he's got institutional backing now, and that's its own kind of dangerous. What he'll actually do, Ginny said from Ron's other side, having arrived soundlessly and begun eating, is follow Harry around until he finds something that can be framed as a violation and then run to Umbridge with it. He doesn't need to be clever. He just needs to be present. Then we keep everything clean, Harry said. Everything's already clean, Neville said, arriving with Luna, both of them carrying more food than strictly necessary. We haven't met in the room in 4 days. We've been working in pairs in the library, which is visible and obviously innocuous. 3 days until the weekend, Harry said. If we can hold through the weekend without giving her anything, she'll manufacture something, Hermione said quietly. If she can't find a genuine violation, Harry, this is what I've been thinking about. She has the authority to call any student into her office for questioning. She doesn't need a specific violation. She just needs to manufacture the appearance of one in her documentation, and the decree gives her enough latitude to document conversations as evidence of intent. Luna set down her fork. She's going to call you in. I know, Harry said. Not for detention. For formal questioning. I know. He looked at the table, thinking through the shape of it. If she calls me in for formal questioning, she needs a pretext. What pretext does she have? Hermione's expression changed in the way it did when she'd been sitting on information and had decided it was time. The beacon. The table stilled. She knows it activated. She knows you brought something significant back from Privet Drive. The decree clause about magical devices of unknown origin in student possession. Hermione looked at Harry steadily. She can call you in under that clause. Ask you to produce the device. If you refuse, that's a violation. If you produce it, she can't take it, Harry said. The certainty was immediate and complete. I'm not producing it. Then that's a refusal, which is a documented violation. One violation, Harry said. She needs 9. She can have 1. She'll use the questioning itself as documentation. Any answer you give, any refusal, any statement of any kind, she'll document it in terms that support her version. Harry was quiet for a moment, working through it. The problem wasn't difficult to see. Umbridge had a framework where every action Harry took was either compliance, which produced the device, or resistance, which produced a violation. The frame itself was the trap, not any particular choice within it. Then I don't enter the frame, he said. Ron looked at him. How? She can call me in. She can ask her questions. I can answer them with complete honesty in ways that don't give her anything documentable. He thought about Sirius's journal. A fight is different from a duel. She's set up a formal questioning structure because formal structures give her documentation. I respond formally but in a way that addresses her questions precisely and gives her nothing beyond the precise answer. No elaboration, no escalation, no reaction. He paused. And I'm not going alone. She won't allow, she'll have to deal with it. He looked at Hermione. The decree gives her the authority to question students. It doesn't specify she can exclude other students from being present in the corridor. It doesn't specify I can't have someone with me. He thought about it more carefully. Actually, does the decree specify anything about documentation of the questioning itself? Hermione blinked. No. A pause. No, it doesn't. So if someone documented the questioning from our end, the expression on Hermione's face went through 3 stages quickly and landed on something that was satisfaction combined with the slightly reluctant acknowledgement that she hadn't thought of it first. Counter-documentation. Parallel record. If her version of events is contested by a simultaneous independent record, any petition she files with the Ministry is disputed on evidential grounds. The communication buttons, Ginny said. If someone outside the office had a button and someone inside had one and the buttons were open the whole time, everything would be transmitted and recorded, Hermione said. Yes. She was already opening her bag. I need to check the protein modification specifications. James built a recording function into the button design, I'm sure of it. There's a note in his part of the red journal about, she found the journal, flipped to the back quarter. Here. Latent archive function. The buttons can retain an impression of transmitted communication for up to 48 hours. Which means anything said in that office would be preserved. Can she detect it? Neville asked. Not without knowing it exists. Hermione looked up. Standard detection charms scan for active magical devices. The button in dormant record mode reads as a piece of metal. She'd have to be specifically looking for it. She won't be, Harry said. She'll have a general detection sweep set up for the obvious things, wands, known communication devices. The buttons are old magic, pre-standard detection frameworks. They'd read as inert. Your father designed them to be undetectable, Luna said. Not a question. Yes, Harry said. He was careful about that. He thought about the formal questioning for the rest of the morning, working through it in the background while sitting through History of Magic, which required almost no active attention and therefore functioned as useful thinking time, and by the time he got to potions he had the shape of it. Not a plan exactly, more a posture. A way of being in the room with Umbridge that occupied none of the roles she'd scripted for him and was therefore genuinely outside her prepared framework. The summons came Wednesday morning. A note delivered by one of the school owls to the breakfast table, pink parchment, Umbridge's handwriting in the overneat script of someone who'd been told their natural hand was difficult to read and had overcorrected. Mr. Potter. You are required in my office at 7 o'clock this evening for formal questioning under Educational Decree 26. You will bring the magical device currently in your possession. Professor Umbridge, High Inquisitor. Harry read it. He passed it to Hermione without comment. She read it, folded it precisely, and handed it back. 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, he confirmed. I'll have the button configured by 6. He spent the afternoon in double transfiguration, which had the advantage of requiring enough focus to prevent excessive advanced thinking about the evening, and then in the room of requirement from 5 until 6:30, which had the advantage of being productive. He worked through the reactive dummy sequence alone, the full escalating progression, all 12 stages, pushing through them with a speed and completeness he hadn't attempted before, not pausing between stages, maintaining offensive and defensive integration from the first exchange to the last. He finished the 12th stage and stood in the middle of the training space for a moment, breathing normally, and knew he was ready. Not for Umbridge specifically. For the broader thing. The fight that was coming in whatever form it arrived. At 6 Hermione appeared in the room with the communication button in her palm, already in configuration mode, the protean charm running with a faint warmth that was only perceptible to someone who knew what to feel for. She handed it to Harry. He pocketed it. She had its pair. Everything transmitted will be archived, she said. I'll have Ron with me. Ginny at the end of the corridor. Luna at the staircase. Neville outside the entrance to her office, not suspicious, he'll have a book. And if she moves to take the beacon? She can't compel you to produce it without a formal ministry order, which requires a Wisengamot hearing to issue. The decree doesn't give her seizure authority. Hermione paused. I checked 4 different legal precedents. She cannot take it. She'll try. Then she'll be attempting something outside her legal authority, which is documented on our end and is itself a violation of the High Inquisitor's designated powers. Hermione met his eyes. She oversteps, we have it. Harry looked at her. This is good work, Hermione. She accepted this in the way she accepted genuine compliments, directly, without deflection. I know, she said. Go. He walked to Umbridge's office through the corridor with its kitten plates and its pink and its particular ambience of cheerful institutional menace. Neville was at the end of the corridor with a copy of Magical Theory that he was reading with the committed focus of someone who had been sitting in one place for an entirely innocent reason. He and Harry exchanged no acknowledgement whatsoever as Harry knocked. Come in. He went in. The office was warm in the specific way of rooms that had fires too large for their square footage, and the kitten plates were numerous and unanimous in their assessment that the world should be soft and pink and full of the gentle sounds of contented small animals. Umbridge was behind her desk with her clipboard and a stack of parchment and the smile that had no content. She indicated the chair opposite her with a small gesture. Harry sat. Mr. Potter, she said pleasantly. Professor. Thank you for coming. He said nothing to this, because it hadn't been an invitation and they both knew it, and acknowledging the fiction of its voluntariness would be a small concession that she would use. Umbridge's smile held for a moment, making a small inventory of his non-response. Then she set her quill against her parchment and began. I understand you came back from your summer holiday in possession of a magical device of unknown origin. I came back from my summer in possession of items that belong to me, Harry said. The decree requires that any magical device of unknown origin, Harry said. Yes. The device in my possession has a known origin. It belonged to my godfather. A pause. Brief, but there. He noted it. Your godfather, she said pleasantly. Sirius Black. Yes. Who was a convicted, who was a fugitive from ministry justice. Who was never convicted, Harry said. Sirius Black was imprisoned without trial, which is a matter of ministry record. He escaped Azkaban and was never subsequently tried before the Wisengamot. He died without a conviction on his record because a conviction requires a trial. He held her gaze across the desk. So the device belonged to a man who was, legally, never convicted of anything. The smile was entirely unchanged. The eyes behind it were calculating something with quick, precise attention. She'd expected defensiveness or bluster or the kind of emotional escalation that came from pressing on grief. She'd gotten a legal argument delivered in the conversational tone of someone discussing the weather. She made a note on her parchment. "The device," she said. "I'd like to see it." "I know," Harry said. Silence. "Mr. Potter." "I'm aware you'd like to see it," he said. "I'm choosing not to produce it. You have the authority under Educational Decree 26 to request that a student produce a device for inspection. I'm exercising the right, under the same legal framework that governs the decrees, to decline without a formal ministry order." He paused. "If you'd like to pursue a formal ministry order, that requires a Wisengamot hearing. I'd be happy to present the device's history and legal provenance at that hearing." A longer pause this time. Umbridge set her quill down. She folded her hands on the desk. "You've done some research," she said pleasantly. "My friend is thorough," Harry said. "Miss Granger." He said nothing. "Let me be direct," Umbridge said, and the pleasantness held but something shifted below it, the professional register dropping slightly, the real instrument of her becoming briefly more visible. "There is concern at the ministry level regarding a magical signature event that occurred at your address during the summer holidays. An activation of considerable power. A device of significant and non-standard magical architecture." She looked at him. "This is a matter of public safety, Mr. Potter, not a disciplinary exercise." "Public safety," Harry said. "The ministry has a responsibility," Harry agreed, "which it discharged by assigning you to come here, document violations, and file a petition against the headmaster." He watched her face. "That's not public safety. That's institutional politics. And the device has nothing to do with either." The smile had thinned by a measurable degree. "You're a 15-year-old student," she said. The pleasantness was still there, but it had changed texture, less decoration, more structure. "The real warning. The concerns of the Ministry of Magic regarding magical events in Britain are not something you are equipped to evaluate." "Then I look forward to explaining my position to the Wisengamot," Harry said. "Whenever you'd like to arrange that hearing." He stood. She was momentarily still, not frozen, not thrown, but recalibrating. He watched the calculation running behind her eyes with the glasses-aided ability to read magical signature that had been carrying over into something closer to reading intent in the last few weeks. She hadn't anticipated him standing. The formal structure of a questioning assumed the questioner's control of its duration. "I haven't dismissed you," she said. "You're not required to," he said. "The decree specifies I must present myself for questioning. It doesn't specify duration or the terms of conclusion." He looked at her. "I'm available for a Wisengamot hearing if you choose to pursue one. That's the appropriate next step." He walked to the door. Behind him, the scratch of her quill on parchment resumed, fast, pressing, the sound of someone documenting urgently. "Let her document." He stepped into the corridor. Neville didn't look up from his book but exhaled by a visible degree. Harry walked past him at normal pace and turned the corner and found Ron and Hermione in a window alcove 6 feet away, Hermione's hand closed around the communication button, her expression doing the controlled version of something that wanted to be significantly more expressive. "She can't do it," Hermione said immediately, very quietly. "She cannot compel you without the Wisengamot order. I have the entire questioning on record. Everything she said, everything you said. If she files anything with the ministry that misrepresents that exchange, she'll file something," Harry said. "Then she'll be filing a falsified document under ministerial authority, which is a different category of problem for her." Ron was looking at Harry with an expression of pure, undiluted satisfaction. "You cited the decree back at her." Hermione's research. You did it in the room. Ron shook his head slowly. She did not see that coming. She saw something coming, Harry said. Just not that shape. He thought about her expression when he stood, the half-second recalibration of someone very good at preparation encountering a situation that had moved outside their preparation. She'll recalibrate. She's fast and she's experienced and she's not going to let a 15-year-old's legal argument stop her. She'll find another approach. How long does she have before the petition becomes urgent? Hermione thought about it. She needs 9 more violations. After tonight she'll be aggressive about generating them, she'll push the squad, push the Quidditch interpretation, push wherever she can. She paused. But she's also going to need to deal with the Wizengamot question now. She bluffed on the device and you called it. That's going to sit with her. The 3 of them stood in the alcove as the castle settled into its evening sounds. We need to go to Dumbledore, Hermione said. Harry looked at her. I know, she said quickly. I know what you're going to say. I'm not going to say anything yet, Harry said. Tell me why. Because she's going to overstep, Hermione said. She's recalibrating right now and when she comes back she'll come back harder and she'll push until she finds something that justifies the petition. If we have Dumbledore informed, not directing us, not managing us, just informed, then when she moves against him he's not blindsided. And we have someone in authority who knows the counter-documentation exists. She looked at him carefully. I'm not saying let Dumbledore take over. I'm saying use him as a piece on the board. Harry thought about Sirius's voice. I'm not asking you to distrust him. I'm asking you to understand that he makes decisions the way empires are run. Not yet, he said. But I'll write to him tonight. Not asking for anything. Just, informing. He thought about it. He should know where we are. The days that followed were taught in the specific way of a situation that hadn't broken yet but was under significant pressure. The inquisitorial squad was active and visible. Malfoy and his cohort moved through the castle with the particular energy of people who had newly acquired institutional backing and hadn't yet tested its limits or found them. Harry and the group moved through their days with deliberate cleanliness, nothing documentable, nothing that could be framed as violation. The communication buttons were always in their pockets. The room of requirement sessions were rare and brief and left no trace. Umbridge gave Harry another detention. He went. Lines. 2 hours. He left without incident. She watched him the entire time with the calculating assessment of someone building towards something and he gave her the same thing he'd been giving her for weeks, which was nothing useful. The confrontation, when it came, wasn't in her office. It was in the corridor outside the defense classroom, 11 days after the formal questioning, and it was not Umbridge but Malfoy. Harry was walking to class with Ron when Malfoy stepped out from a side passage with Crabbe and Goyle flanking him and 3 other squad members behind, and the specific quality of the positioning, blocking the corridor, 5 against 2, was designed to be a threshold moment. Potter, Malfoy said. Produce the device. Harry stopped. He looked at Malfoy and felt exactly nothing that resembled threat. Malfoy had a badge and institutional backing and the practiced confidence of someone who had spent 5 years exercising power and contempt in this building and was very comfortable with both. He also had no authority to compel anything and knew it, which meant this was performance rather than enforcement, a show of force rather than an exercise of it. No, Harry said. As a member of the inquisitorial squad, you don't have seizure authority, Harry said. Neither does Umbridge. There's a Wizengamot process for that and she knows it and so do you. He looked at Malfoy with the same direct, unconcerned attention he'd given Umbridge. Move. Malfoy's eyes did something complicated. He'd prepared for more than this, for an escalation he could document, for a reaction he could take back to Umbridge. He'd gotten a flat refusal and a legal reference and 2 words. Careful, Potter, he said. The warning had nothing behind it. You too, Harry said pleasantly, and walked past him. Ron fell in beside him without a word. They turned the corner and Ron said, in a completely normal voice, "You know he's going to Umbridge right now." "Yes. This afternoon she's going to have another item for her parchment." "Yes. Does that bother you?" Harry thought about it genuinely. No. Because it's a confrontation that didn't give her anything real. Malfoy's account of that is, Potter said no and walked away. She can document it, but it won't hold up as a violation because he doesn't have seizure authority and I cited the correct legal basis. She knows that. He glanced at Ron. What it does is confirm that we know the legal framework. Which changes what she thinks she's dealing with. She thinks she's dealing with a 15-year-old student, Ron said. She was dealing with a 15-year-old student, Harry said. She's now dealing with someone who's read her decree structure from the ground up, understands the legal precedents, and is not giving her what she needs. He looked ahead. That's a different problem for her. They were 10 minutes late to defense. Umbridge noted it on her parchment. Harry opened his textbook to the correct page and read theory about shield charms with the attentive expression of a diligent student. That evening, Hermione came to the room of requirement with her expression at the threshold between alarm and the controlled processing of alarm. She filed, she said. They all looked at her. She filed the petition 2 days early. She's at 17 documented violations. She's interpreting the Malfoy corridor incident as 3 separate violations, which is insane legally, but she's filed it anyway. Hermione set her notes down. She's petitioning for high inquisitorial authority and she's attached the file on the beacon as a supplementary exhibit under the public safety provision. She needs 20, Harry said. She filed at 17 with a request for emergency consideration under a provision she's interpreting as granting expedited review. Hermione looked at him steadily. The Ministry can grant emergency consideration within 48 hours. 48 hours, Neville said. Yes. Can they actually grant it on 17? Ron asked. Legally, no. The provision requires 20. But she's betting that Fudge will rubber stamp it and the legal review will happen after the fact. Hermione paused. If the Ministry grants it, she has authority over the school by Friday morning. The room was quiet. Harry thought for 10 seconds. Clean, directed thought, the kind that didn't spiral because there wasn't time for spiraling and no inclination toward it. The counter-documentation, he said. Everything we have, the recording of the questioning, the parallel account of the Malfoy incident, the legal analysis of the decree violations, it needs to reach someone at the Ministry who can act on it before Friday, Hermione said. Arthur Weasley, Ron said immediately. Everyone looked at him. Dad's in the Ministry. He's not high enough that Fudge is watching him, but he knows the procedural channels. He knows who handles decree review. And he'll move fast if I ask. Ron's voice had the certainty of someone drawing on a specific and reliable resource. I send Pig tonight. Dad gets it by morning. The counter-documentation goes to your dad, Harry said. What else? Dumbledore, Hermione said. Not asking for action. Just informing. She met his eyes. You said you'd written. I said I'd write. I didn't. Harry, I'll write tonight, he said. It wasn't deflection. He'd been turning the timing of it over for days and the timing was now. I'll send both tonight. There's one more thing, Luna said. They looked at her. She was sitting at the edge of the group with her dirigible plum earrings and her expression of lateral certainty. The petition references the beacon as a public safety exhibit, she said. Which means when the Ministry reviews it, whoever reviews it, they'll have the description of what it is. A blood-keyed device of significant power, activated at the home address of Harry Potter, designed by Sirius Black using pre-Ministry magic. She paused. Someone at the Ministry is going to understand what that means. What it implies about what Sirius Black was doing and thinking before he died. The room absorbed this. It makes the case that Sirius was preparing Harry independently, Hermione said slowly. Outside Dumbledore's knowledge. Outside Ministry oversight. Which is exactly the narrative Fudge is afraid of. No, Harry said. It makes the case that a man who loved his godson built something to protect him. That's the narrative. He looked around the group. That's what the counter-documentation says. That's what the Wisengamot hearing shows. Everything Sirius built, everything in that cache, was protection. Not rebellion. Not an army. One man making sure one child had what he needed. The room was very still. That's a story the Ministry can't easily attack, Neville said. No, Harry agreed. It isn't. He left the room of requirement at 10 and went straight to his desk and wrote 2 letters. The first to Arthur Weasley, attached the counter-documentation, the archived questioning record, the Malfoy incident account, Hermione's legal analysis, everything, and kept the letter itself short and clear. The Ministry is about to be asked to grant expedited high inquisitorial authority on 17 documented violations. The requirement is 20. Attached is a counter-record. Please find whoever needs to see this. The second letter was to Dumbledore. He wrote it 3 times before he got it right. Not because he didn't know what to say but because the relationship between himself and Dumbledore was one he was navigating in real time and the letter needed to reflect where he actually was with it, not angry, not deferential, something more precise than either. The final version said, Professor, I wanted you to know that I found something this summer that Sirius left for me. I've been working with it. I have counter-documentation to Umbridge's petition that I'm sending to the Ministry tonight through another channel. I'm not asking you to act on my behalf. I'm informing you because you should know, and because I think you'd want to. He paused, then added, I'm not afraid of what's coming. I thought you should know that too. He sent both letters with Hedwig, who took them with the precision of an owl who understood urgency, and then sat at his desk and looked at the beacon on his nightstand, quiet now, the archive spent, the warmth a constant baseline. The Ministry would answer within 48 hours. Whatever the answer was, Harry was ready for it. Chapter 8, The War We Choose. The Ministry's answer came Thursday. Not a letter. Not a formal decree posted to the notice board. The answer came in the form of 3 Ministry officials who arrived at Hogwarts at 7 in the morning and went directly to Umbridge's office, and the school knew about it before breakfast because that was how schools worked. Nothing significant happened in a castle full of observant adolescents without half of them knowing within 20 minutes. Harry heard about it from Ginny, who'd been coming down from the Ollery at 6:45 and had watched the 3 officials cross the courtyard from the window on the staircase landing. She described them with the precise, practical attention of someone who'd grown up in a household where reading people quickly was a useful skill. 2 men and a woman, Ministry robes, identification badges, the specific body language of officials who had been given a job that required speed and were unhappy about the time of morning. Harry listened to this over breakfast with his tea going warm in his hands and his face entirely neutral. Not Fudge's people, Hermione said, from the other side of the table, voice low. She'd had exactly the same thought from Ginny's description. Fudge's people don't come before 9 and they don't move like that. These are Decree Review Office people. The procedural ones. She was holding her pumpkin juice without drinking it. Mr. Weasley got through. Dad's fast when he needs to be, Ron said. He was eating with the determined appetite of someone who decided that whatever was happening today, he was going to face it on a full stomach. The 3 Ministry officials were in Umbridge's office for 2 hours. Harry went to Charms. He sat at his bench and performed summoning charms with the quiet focus of someone who had made peace with the fact that the significant events of the day were currently happening without him and would report back when they were ready. Flitwick moved through the classroom with his usual precise energy and stopped at Harry's bench long enough to examine the results of his last 3 attempts and make a small approving sound that he clearly hadn't planned to make. Harry spent the rest of Charms thinking about the cache. About what came after this, after the Ministry question resolved itself one way or another, after Umbridge's position clarified or collapsed, after the immediate pressure of the petition lifted. He'd been in a reactive mode for weeks, necessarily, responding to Umbridge's moves with the counter-strategy Hermione had built and the legal framework they'd extracted from Sirius's materials. It had been effective. It was also finite, a defensive posture, which was useful for buying time and not useful for winning anything. The real work was forward. He thought about what Sirius had said in the archive. Your job is to be too busy being yourself to let it define you. He thought about his father's 43 items and the specific one about the difference between choosing not to use power and being caged from it. He thought about the training room in the cache basement, the 12-stage dummy sequence, the point 3 weeks ago when he'd stopped pulling his spells. There was a war happening. Not the political theater of Umbridge and Fudge, though that was real and had to be managed. The actual war, Voldemort building something, gathering people, moving pieces in the dark with the particular patience of someone who'd had 15 years to think about what he'd do differently. Harry had been named as a point of vulnerability in that war, a prophecy child, a symbol, a target. He had spent 5 years being positioned by circumstances and good intentions and other people's protective instincts into a role that was reactive by design. He was done with reactive by design. The ministry officials left at 10:15. Harry was in transfiguration when they crossed the courtyard again, visible through the high windows on the north wall, and he tracked their progress across the grounds without turning his head. 2 of them were walking at the pace of people who had completed a task. The third, the woman, was walking faster, ahead of the others, already looking at parchment. McGonagall was at the front of the room, demonstrating a particularly complex human-to-object transformation, and she didn't look at the window. But her hand paused for exactly 1 second in the middle of the demonstration, and then continued. She'd seen. Harry filed that away. Hermione found him between transfiguration and lunch, appearing at his shoulder in the corridor with a parchment already in her hand. Petition denied, she said. He looked at her. Procedural grounds. The Decree Review Office found that she filed at 17 violations when the requirement is 20, which they classified as a fundamental procedural error that invalidates the petition regardless of the supplementary exhibits. Hermione's voice was controlled but her eyes were bright with the satisfaction of watching legal architecture function as designed. They've issued a formal finding that the expedited review provision she cited doesn't apply to decree petitions, that's a separate legal pathway she misread. And, she paused for 1 full beat. The counter-documentation was entered into the formal ministry record. It's now part of the official file. Every document we produced. The questioning archive. The legal analysis. All of it. Harry was quiet for a moment. Fudge will override it, he said. Fudge can't override a decree review finding without a full Wisengamot vote, which requires 30 days' notice and a quorum. She tucked the parchment away. She can refile. She needs 20 violations. She has 17. She can generate 3 more, she will. Probably. But the counter-documentation is on record now, which means her next filing will be contested from the first moment. The review office has already seen our version of events. Hermione looked at him steadily. We bought time. Significant time. How did you get the findings so fast? Mr. Weasley, she said simply. He knows someone in the review office. He was there at 8 this morning. She allowed herself a real smile. He also sent a note back. He said, Ron has it. Harry found Ron at the Gryffindor table before lunch. Ron handed him a folded piece of parchment with an expression that was clearly trying to be casual and not quite achieving it. The note from Arthur Weasley was short, Harry, well handled. The documentation was clean and thorough and made their job easy. I can't do more from my position without attracting attention, but what you've sent will hold. Be careful. Your father would have been delighted, and so is Sirius, I suspect. Arthur. Harry folded it and held it for a moment. So is Sirius, I suspect. He put it in his pocket. The pocket that had the piece of paper, the folded letter, and was now becoming a repository of the specific weight of people who believed in him. Umbridge was in defense that afternoon. She came in with her clipboard and her smile and the kitten on her lapel brooch and taught 40 minutes of approved theoretical content on shield charm classification, not how to cast them, not how to feel them, but how to categorize them in the Ministry's approved taxonomy, which was the kind of knowledge that served no one in any actual defensive situation but generated clean, documentable compliance with the approved curriculum. Harry took notes. Neatly. He paid attention to the taxonomy the way he paid attention to a thing he needed to know and would have no use for, with the practiced thoroughness of a student doing exactly what was required. Umbridge watched him the entire lesson. Not the assessment look of the first weeks. Something different now, more specific, more contained. She'd been handed a setback this morning and she was reprocessing. The petition denied, the counter-documentation on the official record, her legal strategy exposed as incompletely researched. She was not a woman who accepted setbacks as final. She was reframing. After the lesson, as students filed out, she said, pleasantly, publicly, to the class in general but directed at Harry with the precision of someone who had moved from formal approaches to ambient ones, the Ministry's interest in the safety of Hogwarts students remains entirely committed and unchanged. Harry looked at her. I'm glad to hear it, Professor, he said, and walked out. Behind him, the scratch of her quill. Documenting something. He didn't know what and didn't particularly care. The evening's room of requirement session was different from every previous one. He called it and they came, and when they were seated he didn't start with training. He sat in the middle of the circle they'd formed and said, I want to talk about what comes after Umbridge. The room was attentive. She's down but not done. She'll refile. She'll generate violations. Fudge is behind her and Fudge controls the Daily Prophet narrative and Fudge has been running the institutional response to Voldemort's return since last June. He looked around the group. The Ministry isn't the war. But it's in the way of the war, which makes it a problem. What we've done this week, he paused. It's bought time. It isn't a solution. The solution to the Ministry is Voldemort being provably back, Ron said. Not Harry's word. Not even Dumbledore's word. Something the Ministry can't deny. Which means something happening publicly, Hermione said. Something witnessed. That's coming, Harry said. Voldemort will move when he's ready and when he does there'll be no more denying it. The question is what we are when that happens. He looked at the group. We've been building since the cache. 12 days there, weeks here in this room. We're better. We're considerably better. But I want to talk honestly about what better means. He had their full attention. Voldemort isn't Malfoy with a badge, he said. Voldemort is, he thought about the graveyard. About the specific quality of that magic, old and absolute and entirely unconcerned with fairness or limitation. He's experienced in a way that none of us are, and he's been gathering people who are experienced in the same ways, and the Order is thin and working without public support and Dumbledore has his own approach which isn't ours. He paused. I'm not trying to win this war by myself. I'm not trying to run an army. But I want the 6 of us to be genuinely capable, not competent, capable, because when it starts properly we will not have time to become something we aren't already. What are we already? Ginny asked. Harry thought about it. Honest answer. We're the best prepared group of students this castle has produced since the Marauders. That's not arrogance. That's what 12 days in that cache and weeks in this room with those books and those materials adds up to. He looked around the circle. Neville can immobilize 2 trained dummies simultaneously and move on to a third before the first 2 have recovered. Hermione's shield work is genuinely beyond Newt level. Ron's spatial control in a real fight is the kind of thing Aura instructors take years to produce. Luna finds the specific crack in any defense in 30 seconds flat. Ginny's wand speed is, he stopped. Say it, Ginny said. Extraordinary, he said. Your wand speed is extraordinary. She accepted this exactly as Hermione accepted compliments, directly, without deflection. "I know," she said. "And together," Harry said, "we're something different from any of us individually. We move like something that's been built rather than assembled." He paused. "But Voldemort isn't a 12-stage dummy. He isn't Umbridge. And we need to be honest about what the gap is and how we close it." "The warfare text," Hermione said immediately. "There are 12 chapters one haven't gotten through yet. There's a section on multicaster coordination specifically, formation magic, shared shield work, offensive patterns that require more than one caster. The Marauders built the cache with 6 people in mind, and I think those chapters were part of why." "Then those chapters are this week," Harry said. "And the training sessions this week go to 12 stages every session, all 6 of us, no holding back." He looked at each of them. "We've been careful." "Good. We needed to be careful." But careful was a response to Umbridge, and Umbridge is a ministry official with a clipboard. What's coming doesn't care about careful. The session ran for 3 hours. It was the best session they'd had, not because of a single moment but because of the cumulative weight of everything they'd built pushing through into something cohesive. The 6-person formation Hermione had found in the warfare text wasn't complicated to understand, but it was demanding to execute. It required each person to maintain awareness of 5 others while performing their own function, to read shifts in the group's position in real time and adjust, to trust without confirming. They ran it 4 times. The 4th time was different from the first in ways that were significant and unmistakable. At 11 Harry sat alone in the room after the others had left and felt the particular quality of a day that had had both a victory and a forward horizon in it. The beacon was in his hand. He brought it most evenings now, not because it was necessary but because the warm weight of it in his right hand was something he'd grown accustomed to, something that felt like continuity. He thought about writing again to Dumbledore. Not because he needed to. The headmaster had sent a response to his first letter that was short, careful, and revealing in its brevity. "Harry, I know. I'm glad. I trust what you've built. Please be careful with what comes next. AD. I trust what you've built." Harry had read that 3 times. He understood it now in the way he hadn't entirely understood it when it arrived, Dumbledore saying, in the compressed language of a man who controlled information carefully, that he knew what the cache was, knew about the beacon, knew what Sirius had done, and had chosen not to interfere. Whether that was trust in Sirius's judgment or trust in Harry's or both, the effect was the same. Dumbledore was not the obstacle. He was, in this specific context, silent support. Harry set the beacon down on the floor in front of him and looked at it. The archive was gone but the device was still alive. He'd understood in the weeks since the opening that the resonance archive had been one function among several, and its opening had changed the beacon rather than diminished it. The warmth was different now, richer, like a room after a fire had been burning in it all day. The hum had dropped a register. And the rings moved with a quality he couldn't entirely describe, less mechanical, more responsive, as though the spent archive had left something behind that was more like a presence than a function. "We'll be watching," Sirius had said. Harry believed it. He believed it the way he believed in the protective magic his mother had made, not as a supernatural claim but as a real thing that existed in the actual structure of the world, love that had worked so hard and so specifically that it had bent physics around it and left a shape behind. He picked up the beacon and went to bed. The attack came on a Friday night. Harry felt it before he understood it, woke at 2:15 from a sleep with no dreams to a quality of wrongness in the castle that was physical, a pressure change, the specific resonance of strong dark magic activating somewhere in the building. Not inside, not students, something at the perimeter. Something large. He was sitting up and reaching for his wand before he was fully awake, the beacon on his nightstand doing something new, all 3 rings rotating simultaneously, the opposite directions, a configuration he'd never seen, the warmth spiking to genuine heat. Not a navigation function. Not a record function. The original function, the one it had been built for before anything else. The alarm. Mortal danger. Proximity. Active. He was dressed in 40 seconds. The button in his palm, already transmitting 5 answering warmths from 5 other buttons, because they'd established the protocol weeks ago, the buttons worn on wristbands under pajama sleeves against exactly this kind of night arrival. He opened the dormitory door and found Neville already in the corridor, boots in hand, face absolutely awake. "Castle perimeter," Harry said quietly. "I felt it. Wake Ron." The 6 of them were in the entrance hall in 4 minutes. No one who passed them in the corridors, and they passed 3 students, 1 prefect, and a ghost, would have seen a group in obvious haste. They moved with the purposeful quiet of the cash training, fast but not frantic, the formation instinct already present in how they positioned without discussing it. In the entrance hall, Harry stopped. The pressure was from the grounds. North-facing, near the lake's edge, something that had breached the Hogwarts perimeter wards with the careful precision of something that knew exactly how to go through rather than around. Not a student. Not a ministry official. The specific magical signature carried a quality Harry recognized from the graveyard the way a person recognized weather that had hurt them before. Not Voldemort himself. Too quiet for that. But from him, sent by him, in his name and with his intent. Death Eaters, Harry said. No one looked surprised. They'd talked about this. They'd trained for this. The conversation 3 weeks ago in the room of requirement had ended with precisely this scenario mapped out in Hermione's notes, not if but when, not how do we run but how do we respond. 2, Luna said, with her characteristic lateral certainty, head tilted toward the door. 2 distinct signatures. 1 very strong. Bellatrix, Harry said. He didn't know how he knew. He just did. Ginny said nothing. She moved to Harry's right without being asked, wand up, the natural positioning of the 6-person formation's right anchor. We should wake a teacher, Neville said. The castle's alarm network would have done that already, Hermione said. But it'll take them time, Harry said. Which we don't waste standing here. He looked at the group. We push them back from the perimeter. We don't engage if we don't have to. We hold the line until the teachers get there. He paused. And if we have to engage, we don't hold back, Ron said. We don't hold back. They went out. The October night was clear and very cold, the stars absolute overhead, the lake black and still at the far end of the grounds. The path from the entrance down toward the lake was lit by the castle's ambient glow, not bright but enough, and Harry moved down it at pace with the beacon in his left hand and his wand in his right and the beacon's heat telling him exactly where. 50 meters from the lake's northern edge. He saw them before they saw him, 2 figures in dark robes, 1 tall and 1 slight, standing where the ward boundary had been breached, the tear in the castle's protective layer visible even without the glasses as a shimmer in the air, wrong textured, the specific void of an enchantment cut through rather than overpowered. The taller one turned. Bellatrix Lestrange looked at Harry Potter across the dark grounds of Hogwarts with her wild eyes and her absolute, unhesitating joy. "The boy," she said, to her companion. Her voice carried across the cold night with the bright pleasure of someone who had been given exactly what they wanted. "Look. They sent the boy." "We were sent," Harry said, and his voice was completely steady, "to tell you to leave." She laughed. The sound of Bellatrix Lestrange laughing in the dark was one of those sounds that would stay with a person, high and genuine and entirely disconnected from anything that should produce enjoyment. "Oh, I don't think so," she said. "No, I rather think the Dark Lord will be very pleased I found you here. Come here, little," she cast. Harry read it in the half-second he had. She cast fast, faster than most, the spell a curse that came in without the usual preparatory gesture, aimed at his center, and moved the way he'd been moving in the basement for weeks. Not back. Through. He stepped left of the curse's path, felt it pass his right shoulder close enough to heat the air, and was already casting as he completed the movement. The spell hit Bellatrix squarely. Not a soft spell, not a disabling spell, the full-force offensive magic he'd practiced in the basement and stopped apologizing for, the magic that had staggered a 12-stage enchanted dummy 3 times without pausing. It lifted her off her feet. She landed on the grass 10 feet back. The other Death Eater, the slight one, not Bellatrix's caliber, the body language of someone who'd expected the mission to go differently, turned to face the group, and found all 6 of them in formation, wands up, the specific arrangement of the pattern Hermione had found in the warfare text. What they saw was not 6 nervous students. What they saw was a coordinated defensive structure with clear offensive capability and no visible hesitation. The slight Death Eater took 1 step back. Incarcerus, Neville said, quietly, precisely, the root and binding variant he'd been developing for weeks, and the ropes went out and caught and held, and the slight Death Eater went down cleanly. Bellatrix was back on her feet. Of course she was. She was furious, now, the joy converted to something that had an edge, and she turned with a second curse already forming, but Hermione's shield was there first, a shield variant from the restricted texts that didn't absorb the curse but redirected it, sent it back at an angle toward the lake, where it struck the surface and made the black water explode white. Formation, Harry said, quiet and calm, and they moved, the pattern, all 6, the shift and cover that kept the shield active and maintained offensive capability and didn't leave any single person exposed. It was the first time they'd run it against a real threat rather than a training dummy, and it worked with the same fluid competence it had shown in the room of requirement, which meant the weeks had been real work. Bellatrix stood in front of them and Harry watched her calculate. She was extraordinary. He knew that clearly, without drama, the way you knew a fact about the weather. She was capable of things that would kill most of what she was looking at, and she knew it, and her eyes were measuring exactly that, the gap between her capability and theirs, how much of it remained, whether it was worth pressing. She was also, he saw, not alone in the sense that mattered. Through the breached ward, at the very edge of where the castle's light gave way to real dark, there was something he could feel rather than see. The beacon in his left hand was burning now, its heat beyond any previous register, the rings spinning with a speed that was almost blur. Not alarm. Something older. Recognition. He sent me to see, Bellatrix said. Not to Harry, to herself, or to whoever was listening through the dark at the ward's edge. To see what the boy is. She tilted her head, exactly like Luna tilted her head but with entirely different content. I've seen. Then she turned, walked through the breach in the wards, and was gone. The slight Death Eater, still bound, lay on the grass. Harry stood in the cold night air with his wand up and the beacon burning in his left hand and felt the particular quality of a moment that was not an ending but a beginning. Bellatrix had been sent to see. Voldemort had wanted to know what Harry was now, what he'd become in the summer, whether the boy who'd survived the graveyard and the 15 years before it was still only surviving. She'd seen. She would report. Good, Harry thought. Dumbledore appeared at the castle doors 45 seconds later, robes over nightclothes, wand in hand, and crossed the grounds at speed. He took in the scene, 1 bound Death Eater, 6 students in formation, no casualties, the breached ward already beginning to reseal, with the specific quality of expression that was Dumbledore absorbing information he hadn't expected. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. The breach is there, Harry said, pointing. She went back through. One of them is bound. Neville. Dumbledore looked at Neville, who was standing with his wand still up and his bound Death Eater 3 feet away. Dumbledore's expression moved through something that was genuine. Mr. Longbottom, he said. Herbology-based binding, Neville said. I've been developing it. He paused. Professor. Dumbledore looked at the bound figure. Then he looked at Harry again, and for the first time in months, the first time since June, since the graveyard, since Harry had come back to the castle carrying Cedric's body, the headmaster's eyes weren't guarded. The careful management of information and distance was still there, but it had opened slightly, the way a window opened on a cold day, just enough. You've been busy, Dumbledore said. Yes, Harry said. Sirius would be, he stopped. Something crossed his face. Sirius was right to build what he built. I know, Harry said. They looked at each other in the cold dark with the castle at their backs and the lake black and still and the stars overhead, and 6 teenagers stood in formation and McGonagall arrived at a dead sprint from the eastern entrance and the bound Death Eater stirred and the night continued with its necessary business. But something had shifted. Not dramatically. Not with fanfare. The way things shifted when the true accounting of a thing became visible, when the gap between what was managed and what was real finally closed. Harry was real. He was not a symbol, not a weapon, not a child to be protected from the thing his whole life had been pointing toward. He was 15 years old and he had built something from what his father and godfather left him and it had held against Bellatrix Lestrange on the grounds of Hogwarts in the dark and it would hold again. Later, after the Death Eater had been secured and the breach repaired and McGonagall had done the specific version of very thorough that she did when she was deeply shaken and managing it through precision, and after Dumbledore had said, in front of all of them, I should have done this better, Harry, which was not an apology, not quite, but was more than Harry had expected and more than most people ever got from Dumbledore. They were back inside. Warm. Together. The room of requirement had configured itself, without being asked, into something between a common room and a kitchen. Comfortable chairs. Tea. The low, steady light of a fire. It read the room, as it always did, and gave them what they needed. They sat in the warmth and came down from the night's adrenaline with the slow, uneven deflation of people who had done a real thing in real circumstances and were returning to their ordinary selves from the temporary larger ones that danger required. Ron had his hands wrapped around his mug and was staring into the fire. Hermione had her notes open but wasn't writing in them, just looking at the blank page. Neville was very still in his chair in the way he went still when processing something significant. Luna had her eyes closed and was smiling slightly. Ginny had her feet up on the table and was looking at the ceiling with an expression of private assessment. Harry held the beacon. Its warmth was back to baseline, the low, steady hum, the background presence it had maintained since July. The rings were still. The surface was quiet brass. He thought about what Bellatrix had said. I've seen. He thought about Voldemort receiving her report, whatever she'd tell him about what she'd found on the grounds of Hogwarts. 6 students. A formation. A boy who moved through a curse rather than away from it and hit back before the movement was complete. He thought about Voldemort deciding what to do with that information. He'll come himself next time, Harry said. Not as a threat. Not as a worry. As a statement of fact, the way you stated anything you'd worked through fully and arrived at the clean end of. We know, Ron said. Not alarmed. Present. When he does, we'll be ready, Hermione said. She said it the same way Ron said we know, not bravado, not performance. The straightforward confidence of someone who had assessed the situation honestly and arrived at a true conclusion. We will be, Neville agreed. Luna opened her eyes. The beacon will help, she said. It isn't finished yet. The archive was one function. The alarm was one function. There are others. She looked at Harry with her clear, unhurried eyes. Your father built more into it than Sirius finished. There are layers they started and didn't complete. You'll find them. Harry looked at the beacon. How do you know? Ginny asked. Because it's still warm, Luna said simply. If it had given everything it would be cold by now. Harry pressed his thumb against the surface. Warm. Alive. Patient. He thought about a 21-year-old pressing his voice into brass for a child he loved. He thought about a 22-year-old crouching under the stairs of a house he disagreed with, working fast and well, leaving something that would wait 15 years for the right moment. He thought about a journal that said do more than survive and a piece of paper that said the same thing in 4 words. He thought about everything that had been left for him to find, stage by stage, the beacon deciding readiness and opening itself up one layer at a time, and the knowledge that Luna was saying there were more layers, that what had felt like the whole gift had been the beginning of it. He put the beacon in his pocket. He looked at the 5 people around him, Ron in his chair, Hermione with her blank notebook page, Neville coming back from wherever he'd been inside himself, Luna smiling with her eyes closed again, Ginny's feet on the table and her eyes on the ceiling. Sirius had said, the Marauders were never just one person. Harry looked at his 5 people, his Neville and his Luna and his Ginny and his Hermione and his Ron, the 6 of them made from different materials but oriented in the same direction, built from different kinds of courage and shaped by different kinds of loss and bound by something that had been chosen freely every single time, every morning, every session, every evening in a room that knew what they needed before they did. The fire in the room of requirement crackled and the tea was warm, and outside the castle the grounds were quiet and the stars were the same stars that had been there in 1981 when 2 young men had made something extraordinary and hidden it under a floorboard. "All right," Harry said. Everyone looked at him. He was smiling. "Let's talk about what comes next." The war they were in had not chosen them, or rather, it had chosen Harry, once, with a wand raised over a crib, and he had been living in the aftermath of that choice ever since. But there was a difference between a war that found you and a war you walked into with your eyes open and your people beside you and everything your father and godfather had built in your hands. The second kind was still a war. It was also, in the specific and serious way that only the things worth doing were, a choice. Harry Potter had made it. He was not afraid.